I'd like to, let's go ahead and we'll go and get things started. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting of the CVR Safe board meeting to order. We're going to start that this morning before we go to our SACOG board meeting. We have our partners in San Joaquin County online as well as Director Early West. So want to welcome Director Rickman and Director Singh as well to this meeting. To get things started, go ahead and have Director Hume, if you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Director Hume, you good? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Let's see. Director Early, since you're participating remotely under AB 2449, would you please read your statement for the record?
Absolutely. I, Director Early, am participating in this board meeting today due to physical disability that prevents my in-person attendance.
Thank you very much. Next, Lynette, would you please take the roll?
Thank you. Director Andreata?
Here.
Baines?
Present.
Bradford?
Here.
Rollins for Branscombe? Houlihan?
Here.
Chapdelaine?
Here.
Chapman?
Here.
Ring for Clark Kretz?
Here.
Clarici? Absent Desmond?
Here.
Dowden Calvillo?
Present.
Early?
Here.
Gallardo?
Here.
Howdeshelt?
Here.
Hume?
Here.
Jennings?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Kennedy? Kozlowski? Absent Lauren?
Here.
Maple?
Here.
McCully?
Here.
Rickman?
Here.
Rodriguez? Here. Sander? Absent Schaefer?
Here.
Singh? Singh is absent. Teeter?
Here.
Veerkamp?
Here.
Vega?
Here.
Villegas?
Here.
Vice Chair Gallardo?
Here.
Chair Soon?
Here.
And ex officio member Tacker for Aceves.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much.
Through the chair,
Yes, sir.
Baumgarten is here.
Apologies, Director Baumgarten. I've got you for the record. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to public communications, this is the time for anyone who'd like to make comments for items not on the agenda of this board. If I could go to the Madam Clerk, do we have anybody who'd like to speak?
There's no public communications for the safe meeting.
Okay, this one I believe is for our SACOG meeting. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to disclosures. Are there any directors who would need to disclose a conflict for any items on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move over to the consent item. We have a consent calendar. Then would like to move any items from the consent calendar for conversation. Okay, if not, any comments for the consent calendar? Madam
There's
Clerk?
no public comment for the consent calendar.
Okay,
Hume, move approval. Second by Baines.
all right. I have a motion and a second, and we need to do a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Director Andreata?
Yes.
Ains?
Aye.
Baumgarten?
Aye.
Bradford?
Aye.
Rollins for Branscombe? Houlihan?
Aye.
Chapdelaine?
Yes.
Chapman?
Aye.
Ring for Clark Kretz?
Yeah.
Clarici? Absent Desmond?
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo?
Aye.
Early?
Aye.
Gallardo?
Aye.
Howdeshelt?
Aye.
Hume?
Aye.
Jennings?
Yes.
Jones?
Aye.
Kennedy?
Aye.
Kozlowski? Absent Lauren?
Aye.
Maple?
Aye.
McCully?
Aye.
Rodriguez?
Aye.
Sander? Absent Schaefer?
Aye.
Rickman?
Yes.
Singh? Absent Teeter? Veerkamp? Vega? Villegas?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gallardo?
If I vote twice, someone will be bound to notice.
Thank you. And Chair Soon?
I'll abstain since I wasn't here for that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to action items. We have one action item on this calendar. That's the approve and release draft of the CVR Safe Fiscal Year 2025-2026 budget. Ms. Barbara Van Bechtold, if you would please present the item. Good morning.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. This morning before you have the draft Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways budget for fiscal year 25-26. The SAFE is comprised of El Dorado, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. The revenues for the CVR SAFE are collected through a $1 fee that's assessed at the time of vehicle registration in each of the participating counties. The draft budget shown in attachment A estimates costs for the operations and maintenance of our core call box system and for enhanced services and projects like Freeway Service Patrol, Intelligent Transportation Systems Services, excuse me, the 511 system, big data, and our open data hub. The CVR Safe bylaws require that a budget is approved before July 1st of each fiscal year. So we're asking that the CVR Safe Board approve the release of the draft fiscal year 25-26 CVR Safe budget for public review and comment, with final adoption anticipated in June. So we'll be coming back next month. And the budget will be posted on our Capital Valley Regional Safe website after your approval. If you have any questions, I can answer those now.
Thank you, Barbara. Any questions for Ms. Van Bechtold? Seeing none. Lynette, are there any public comments on this item?
There's no public comment.
Okay. With that, I'll bring it back to the board for action. Anyone like to- Okay. Motion from Donna Calvia, second from Director Desmond. Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. Director Andreata,
Yes.
Baines,
Aye.
Boomgarden,
Aye.
Bradford,
Aye.
Lens for Branscombe.
Aye.
Houlihan,
Aye.
Chapdelaine,
Yes.
Chapman. Ring for Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Clarici, absent Desmond,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Early,
Aye.
Powdershell, Hume,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Jones,
Aye.
Kennedy, Kozlowski, absent Lauren,
Aye.
Maple,
Aye.
McCully,
Aye.
Rickman,
Yes.
Rodriguez,
Aye.
Sander, absent Schaefer,
Aye.
Singh, absent Teeter, Veerkamp, Vega, Villegas, Vice Chair Gallardo,
Aye.
and Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, now go ahead and adjourn as the CVR Safe Board of Directors and reconvene as the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Director Rickman, it's nice to hear your voice and thank you for your presence today. Hope to see you soon.
All right, thank you. Have a great week.
You too. All right, we're going to do a little bit of repeat here for this board meeting. Prior to our roll call, we're going to ask Director Early, participating through AB 2449. Would you please read your statement into the record?
Unmuting myself and getting the statement.
No worries.
I, Director Early, am participating in this board meeting today due to physical disability that prevents my in-person attendance.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Thank you, Chair Soon. We can note that the role remains the same from earlier with the absence now of our Safe Director Rickman and Safe Director Singh.
Okay, perfect. Moving on to public communications. Again, this is time for anyone who'd like to make comments on items not on the agenda. I have one speaker card here from Mr. David Schwagel. David, good morning.
Good morning, SACOG Board. David Schwagel with a high-speed rail update. There is a $10 billion funding gap plus an additional 4.1 federal clawback. That's 4.1 billion for a total funding gap of $14.1 billion. And that's just on the initial operating section of Merced to Bakersfield. What the authority plans to do is to attract private investment to fill that funding gap. However, the authority has tried this 7 years ago. They submitted a request for expressions of interest, received 36 expressions of interest, none of which expressing any interest whatsoever in investing in the project. Hopefully they'll have better luck this time, but we as a region have an extraordinary opportunity to bridge that funding gap with private investment on the Merced to Sacramento section. But first, why such a large funding gap? We have had consultants, design build consultants behave badly, forcing the cart before the horse, failing to hold the high-speed rail authority's feet to the fire to acquire 100% of the right-of-way, before commencing with design build activities, all in the interest of accelerating and amplifying their own cash flows in direct violation of the Professional Engineers Act that requires putting the public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens first and foremost. That has cost the taxpayers of California $9 billion. But it's not all doom and gloom. Precision Civil Engineering on Merced de Sacramento delivered an extraordinary value for the money within the confines of just a $1 million contract. Now, let's talk about our region. I have been advocating aggressively for the last 7 years to get Merced de Sacramento on that initial operating section, and I get stonewalled every single time because they say, look, it's a phase 2 section. We cannot do phase 2 before we do phase 1. Otherwise, we're going to have to put it to the public for a vote. And they refuse to put it back to the public for a vote. But with our region, our strategy should be to get Brightline West, who is currently building Rancho Cucamonga, to Las Vegas, have them build Merced de Sacramento. Because if we can convince investors that we are bridging the iOS to the world's 4th largest economy, capital city, the world's first LEED Platinum Marina, and the city with the state's 2nd busiest Amtrak station, then we ought to be able to attract private investment. But it is absolutely essential that we toot our horns because Sacramento is tied with Madison, Wisconsin as being the most overlooked regions in the United States. So let's do everything we can
30 seconds.
to get the message out that if we get Merced de Sacramento section of high-speed rail built by Brightline West, then that is the key. That is what the industry needs to see in order to contribute their own private investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schweigel. Okay, moving on to the formal agenda. Are there any directors that need to announce any conflicts with any items on the agenda? Seeing none, moving on to consent calendar items.
Move the consent calendar.
Okay. Okay, I have a motion from Director Haldershot, second from Downing Calvillo. Are there any comments from the public, Madam Clerk, that you see?
There's no public comment.
Okay, seeing none, I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Oh,
Aye.
I'm
Aye.
sorry, we need to roll call vote. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair Singh.
Yep.
Director Andreatta,
Yes.
Baines,
Aye.
Boomgarden,
Aye.
Bradford,
Aye.
Rollins for Branscombe, Bullahan,
Aye.
Chapdelaine,
Yes.
Chapman.
Aye.
Ring for Clark Kretz.
Yes.
Clarici absent Desmond,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Early,
Aye.
Howdeschelt,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Jones,
Aye.
Kennedy, Kozowski absent Lauren,
Aye.
Maple,
Aye.
McCully, Rodriguez,
Aye.
Sander absent Schaefer, Teeter, Veerkamp, Vega, Villegas,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gallardo,
Aye.
and Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Going on to item number 8, release of the draft 2025 Blueprint Environmental Impact Report. Clint Holtzen, our SACOG staff, will present the item. Good morning, Clint.
Good morning. Just have a brief presentation for you this morning. So the recommendation before you is coming from the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee, recommending the board to authorize the release of our draft blueprint and environmental impact report for a 55-day public review after nearly 3 years of development on this plan. So just a little bit of background. One of the first things the board did with the initiation of this update for the plan was to adopt a triple bottom line policy framework. So a lot of our discussions, analysis to date have been brought to you under this triple bottom line of advancing equity, economic development, and environmental goals. We were able to get an extension from the state to take a little bit more time on this plan, about 2 years more time. That allowed us to do a lot more outreach. So we were able to go out to every single community across the region, able to visit every single council and board of supervisor around the region twice, and hit over 6,000 residents and really get a feel for what residents value about this region. And what we heard a lot of was housing, natural resources, preparing for natural disasters, protecting people, property, and then safety were among the very top priorities for residents across the region. This plan, it's an update, so this is a living document. This is the latest in a long line of these plans that we update. So this is building on prior plans. So it's building on the strategic priorities of your 2020 MTPSCS, as well as those priorities became the SACOG's strategic priorities as part of our strategic plan in 2022. So this plan continues these strategic priorities going forward and organizes all of our policies and our implementing actions around these priorities. The plan's organized into 6 chapters. Kind of what is the plan? Who is SACOG? We wanted to, because we spent so much time doing outreach, we really wanted to highlight how the public outreach and engagement and our partnerships with CBOs this time informed the plan and changed the way the plan looks and what we call for. Chapter 3 gets into our housing and jobs and land use strategies. Chapter 4 on the transportation vision. Chapter 5 kind of talks about how these things interact to achieve all of the positive outcomes of the plan. And then, of course, we get into the policies and implementation actions in Chapter 6. What does this plan do? So this plan is, it is a federal and state requirement. It's really designed to identify, to make consistent kind of the actions of many, many parties across the region. It's fiscally constrained, which is a big challenge. We know that we have far more needs in the region than we have funding to pay for them. And so this plan has to tackle the really hard challenge of prioritizing where we're going to spend our limited transportation resources. And then, of course, it also demonstrates alignment with federal and state requirements. And that is really important as we are going after federal and state grants. To show how we're advancing federal state priorities is hugely important on that front. What this plan does not do is supersede local decision-making authority. Your general plans, your specific plans, all of that authority is still vested with the local governments. But this plan also does not mean that the projects in it automatically receive funding. We need to go out and put our best foot forward at the federal and state level to attract that investment in the region. And so having this regional vision where we're all working together really increases the competitiveness. Being in the plan is what gets you eligible, but showing how you're advancing the plan's vision and the state and federal policies is how you become competitive at those programs. So this plan is not designed to sit on a shelf. As soon as we adopt this plan, we will be moving straight into implementation. Just a little bit more on what got us here today. Last year, we spent the first half of the year really digging in on the land use and housing and jobs assumptions, which led to the board adopting a set of land use assumptions in June. We spent the second half of the year really digging into the transportation side and marrying a transportation network and set of investments to that land use. We adopted that in November, which brought us into 2025. We spent the first couple of months talking policies and implementation actions. How are we going to achieve those ambitious land use and transportation assumptions included in the plan? And that brings us to today, where we are asking you to release the plan for 2 months of public review. During that time, we'll hear from the public. We'll also hear from federal and state partners. So we'll get a real read on how this plan's being received. We'll come back late this summer, early fall, to kind of walk through what we heard, how we're planning to change the plan, and anticipate asking you to adopt in November. And so as we go into the public comment period, we're not just going to sit and wait for that to end. We're going to continue our outreach. So we've got workshops planned in June to bring back community-based organizations to make sure that they understand how their feedback was used. We're holding public hearings for the plan and the EIR. We're going to our advisory committees that SACOG hosts to make sure that our members and partners around the region are aware of the plan's release and able to comment on it. And then we're going to also make sure we're following up with partners and local agencies individually to make sure they are paying attention and that they are able to review, especially the policies and strategies. And with that, I wanted to ask James maybe to close us out with a little bit of kind of what's coming ahead as we enter this summer on this plan.
Okay, thanks, Clint. As Clint said in one of those bullet points, right, we've taken longer to build this plan. We've done more engagement and outreach than ever before. If you all remember, if you were here, AB 350 allowed us in the legislature to get extra time. And in all of that extra time, we've got a plan. We do not want that plan to sit on a shelf or sit on a website, right, and not actually get used. So a lot of the plan is about compliance, meeting mandates, state and federal,
and allowing money to keep flowing. But the plan also suggests we have to rally together as a region. If you go back to the 2020 MTP SES, the board at that time had a big and really good discussion around assumptions on land use, particularly infill development, right? And the discussion was, this is going to be hard. We need some help here. And that's where Green Means Go came from. So that's an excellent example of how we really want to actually pay attention to what we're learning and what we're hearing in the plans and do something about it. Actually, you can go back to the last slide. So this is just a summary chart, right? But hopefully this will resonate. And it comes on the left-hand column. We're talking about things that we've heard through all of the engagement. And that's exactly why we have a whole chapter in the plan, the draft plan, that says how the public and our partner agencies have helped shape this plan. First and foremost, we heard a lot about housing. We went out and surveyed on a transportation plan, and a long-range plan, and a land use plan. And one of the first things we heard back was the housing crisis and the housing challenges in the region. Clint mentioned safety and having more transportation options, and I won't read all the way down the list. But I will say, too, we've just completed, actually, this week, our tour to every single city council and board of supervisors. And one thing we've heard, among others, loud and clear from all of you at the local level through councils is we want your help on grants. We want to be more competitive as a region, right? How do we work together collectively across all 28 jurisdictions? And on the right-hand side, there's the sort of what did we learn from all of our technical analysis, right? So we know, despite Green Means Go, it's in some ways a drop in the bucket in terms of where we are right now. We need more of that infill, and we need more housing in general. We've also learned safety, right? We heard that from the public, traffic safety, fatalities and injuries, and the data also bears that out, that we're going in the wrong direction in terms of fatalities and injuries that are traffic related. We know that our pavement is actually in many communities and in many counties getting worse. So our roads are getting worse, and traffic fatalities are going up. And at the same time, even though this plan is fiscally constrained, we're also counting on a lot of grant funding to fund our projects. And we also have a problem where we have a gas tax that is kind of declining in terms of its revenue, right? So all that by way of saying it's really important we understand what we heard in all this engagement, what we've learned through the analysis, and we're going to take that forward this summer and build basically an implementation plan. One of the interesting sort of twists in having 2 extra years is that bill had a sunset to it. We flipped back to a minor update of this plan in 27. Our next major update has to be completed by 31. You back up 3 years from that. But we basically have longer than we usually have to implement this plan. So we want to start now understanding, and it's not just SACOG as an agency, it's the region, right, as a whole. What do we need to do to implement this plan? How can we meet some of the challenges that we've either heard or the analysis has uncovered? So we wanted to put a finer point on that implementation piece. And I will say, I think in terms of answering your questions about how do we make ourselves more competitive, it is partly about telling that story about implementing the plan. So obviously, we're going to get a lot of feedback in the summer. It's going to go out for public comment if you all approve and release today. But we're going to take all that and try to build that into a what does it mean to implement the plan in the next 5 years.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you, Mr. Olson, for your presentation. And to the entire SACOG staff, we want to commend you for your work in engagement and the work that you've done to put this plan together. Getting input and processing that input for 6,000 residents across our region and input for over multiple years. I think it's fantastic that you went to every single jurisdiction in the region. This plan, there's so much in it, right? It's where transportation and land use come together. It's why there's so much conversation, conflict, things that we try to resolve because of our different communities and what land use and transportation means to every single one of us. But this plan also is aspirational in what we're trying to do for each of our communities as well. And so the implementation of this plan will be key. And for those of you who joined us during Cap to Cap on that tour, it was good for us to see what other communities throughout the nation are trying to do. We're not alone in this effort, making commutes and walkability and air quality better for our regions and our residents. So it's exciting to see where we are at this point. I know there's a lot of work to do to implement going forward, but I have utmost faith in this group here that we'll be able to do this successfully and continue to set the bar for the entire state, if not the nation. With that, I'm going to put it out here for any questions or comments from the board members before we go to public comment. Okay, seeing none. Any public comment on this item, Nanette?
Hi, Chair Soon. I do have a comment to read into the record, and then we have two speakers that are here present that would like to speak. Would you like me to read the comment first?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Apologies. Do you want to take one of the public speakers first while I
Okay,
pull that up?
sure. Yeah. Who do you have? I don't have a speaker card for this item.
We should have Mike Costa with PCTPA.
Oh, this is for 9 though. This is item 9.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Right, we just have the one record to read in. Let me go ahead and grab that. Apologies, that was
That's
my
okay.
mistake.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, go ahead.
while Lynette's pulling that up, I just want to say, I want to thank everyone that was in the room back in June, almost a year ago, up in Yuba City or wherever we were, when I made the pitch to try and have some language included in this plan. I didn't get as much as I was asking for, but I think I got enough to put my foot in the door jam and keep the door open for when we look at future plans and revisions. And I just want to touch on something that the executive director just mentioned relative to competitiveness. And one of the reasons why I fought so hard for that language is that I think that you can have an ideological predisposition and a practical applicability that aren't always eye to eye. In other words, what we want and what we actually get. And so I think it's important to be pragmatic, to have language like what I was trying to get included in order to be competitive when changing priorities happen with our funding partners. And so certainly we're seeing that realized today. And so I think we need to be nimble enough and have a plan that anticipates those moving chess pieces in a way that whatever is someone else's priority, we can incorporate in order to not leave money on the table. So I just want to thank James and all of the staff for working with me to at least have something in the plan that identifies that we're aware and cognizant. So thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate your engagement in that. And I also want to highlight what I think could have been done, but I don't think was, which was the intent of the plan. It was emphasized by Mr. Holton that this does not preclude any of our local land use or local developers from moving forward and trying to do things in our respective communities. I mean, I think that's very important of defining what this plan is. And, hopefully that can quell some of the angst that can happen in what has the perception that has been created in the past. And so I really appreciate the highlighting of that. The good thing is this plan is updated constantly, right? So we will always have this opportunity to have these conversations, and projects within our communities will always have a chance to go forward. When they're in the ground, the shovel's in the ground, they will be in this plan. And so it's more of a timing because of cost constraints, which was spoken about earlier too. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this plan isn't something to be feared. This is a plan for us we should all be at the table. Director Hume added some, requesting some things, and we were able to accommodate some of that. But those conversations, that's exactly what should be happening at this plan, for this plan. And so I'm really pleased to see us getting the message out about that, the local land use in our respective communities being preserved. How are we doing, Lynette?
We're good. Apologies, this
That's okay.
comment is for the next item. So I was ahead of myself.
All right, no worries.
Mr. Chair, I just
Yeah.
wanted to echo your comments. I think that's really important and that the jurisdiction still can move forward But thank you very much for stating that. I just wanted to say that I concur with your statements for the purposes of the record. And thanks staff for working so diligently, going out and all that outreach. I mean, we're such a large organization and you had to go across 6 counties and 22 cities. And so thank you for doing your due diligence as well. And very pleased with how we're progressing at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, with that, I guess I'll entertain a motion then.
Second by
Baines. Lauren seconds.
Director Desmond, I heard Director Baines first. Sorry, Director Lauren. Roll call votes.
Thank you. Director Andreata,
Yes.
Baines,
Aye.
Boomgarden,
Aye.
Bradford,
Aye.
Rollins for Branscombe, Houlihan,
Are.
Chapdelaine,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Ring for Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Clarici, absent Desmond,
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Early,
Aye.
Howdeschelt,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Jones,
Aye.
Kennedy, Kozlowski absent, Lauren,
Aye.
Maple,
Aye.
McCully,
Aye.
Rodriguez,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Teeter, Veerkamp, Vega, Villegas, Vice Chair Gallardo,
Aye.
and Chair Soon.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, congratulations to all. Moving on to mobility zones, item number 9, mobility zones adoption. Kathleen Aziz, SACOG staff. Good morning, Kathleen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and SACOG Board. Good morning. I'm Kathleen Aziz, Principal Planner on your transportation team. Item 9 is an action item. So the action before you today is to designate 23 mobility zones across the 6 counties in our region and adopt 10 of those 23 as phase 1 mobility zones, including some refined boundaries. My presentation this morning is going to include a recap of some of the materials that were brought by our Deputy Project Manager, Justine Resho Patel, before you last month, specifically on identifying the original 23 mobility zones and the process to narrow those 23 mobility zones down to the 10 for phase 1. I'll also cover what's happened since that presentation we gave you last month, specifically on refining the boundaries for the 10 phase 1 mobility zones, and give you a sense of what's next on this project. So last month, Justine went over the process we used to identify 23 mobility zones. This was a place-based approach that used both qualitative and quantitative data. So we started by developing a map that identified areas that have demographic disparities within our region. You'll remember that we used a grassroots bottoms-up approach to develop this map instead of relying on some of the maps that are developed by the state and the federal government that tell us which parts of our region have more needs. We then developed a map that understood where there are combined transportation needs and opportunities. So these are the places where there's gaps in sidewalks and bike lanes, where pavement's in poor condition, where there's a lot of trucks impacting air quality for communities. And specifically, these are the areas where all those things are happening at once. As the graphic demonstrates, we layered those 2 maps on top of each other to identify the places in the region where both of those things are happening, where there's a community that has a demographic disparity compared to its neighbors and a combination of different transportation needs all happening in that same location. This layered analysis identified 23 places across the 6-county region. You see them in boxes here. These are the 23 mobility zones that we're requesting action on today. This Mobility Zones project is funded by a federal grant and is only scoped to do further analysis on 10 zones. So we had the challenge of identifying 23 important places with demonstrated need, but only having the resources to advance 10 of them. So we started the process of narrowing those 23 to 10. This process was led by SACOG staff, administered, but really the decision was made jointly by community members and agency staff. So what we did is we developed zone profiles. You can see an example zone profile on the left that summarized the demographic and transportation challenges that made this place rise to the top to begin with. You can see a full set of the zone profiles in attachment E to your staff report. And then we held a series of meetings with community leaders and agency staff to have them evaluate and make that tough judgment call between which of these areas do we think it's most important to move forward with. and used a combination of ranked choice voting and consensus building to really reach a set of 10 that everyone felt like demonstrated kind of the broad issues across our region and were a model of pilots that we could learn from as we advance this program forward. Visually, this is what that looked like. So we had these 23 zones. Then you'll see here, these are the different zones that were identified by the community versus the agencies. So we started with the community meetings. These community members are county-based and leaders. You can see a full roster of organizations in attachment D to your staff report. So blue shows you the ones that the communities put forward. Then I took this list of the blue zones identified by the community and said to your community development and public works staff, hey, what's missing from this conversation? Which types of places aren't on the list the community put together that we should really be thinking about? And so the yellow boxes here are sort of closing that gap, largely in more suburban areas where staff felt like there wasn't enough representation suburban. There were some really urban core options from the community and some really rural options for the community, and wanted to close that gap. So that landed us with 16 options for the 10, and then did a similar consensus building and ranked choice voting to get to 10 phase 1 mobility zones, which are before you for approval today. These 10 mobility zones overlap with a lot of existing state and federal maps that demonstrate need, but importantly, they're also capturing need that's specific to our region that top-down maps don't show us, right? So there's a lot of overlap for potential for grants opportunities, but we're also thinking about and talking about challenges in this region that we often don't look at, right? And that's one of the advantages of developing our own demographic need map. At Transportation Committee, Director Desmond requested a web map showing those crosses. I didn't have time to get the link into the staff report before it posted, but we do have that web map available, so we'll circulate that on the Mobility Zones website. Okay, looking forward, thinking about what the next steps were. So all of that is material that came before you as an information item last month. And the work at this point was, now that we know what the 10 phase 1 mobility zones should be, how do we go from general boxes describing areas to actual boundaries that make sense? We wanted to establish boundaries that responded to real world conditions like roadways and rivers, things that make sense as barriers for a place, but also capture neighborhood destinations and challenges and opportunities that were identified both by the community and by staff. We did a lot of listening to the agencies and the communities, so there was a bunch of in-person engagement, which I'll provide some detail on the next slide. We had a digital survey that went out specifically to communities in these 10 areas. And then I held individual meetings with all of the relevant jurisdictions to understand what priority projects and issues have they been working on in these areas that we should try to make sure the boundaries capture. The in-person engagement that we did, we reached 510 people in person over the course of February and March, and received more than 900 individual comments about needs in these places. So the boundary recommendations before you reflect a high level of engagement that we've had with the community and a high demonstrated need for transportation improvements in these places. Once we took all that feedback together, it's of course always a challenge to blend the differing feedback. And so you see this process visualized here. We started with the original pink boxes from the quantitative analysis, took the boundaries that the community and or the partner agencies suggested, and also the locations where they identified potential projects or safety challenges, and melded those together to create a draft zone boundary. All these draft zone boundaries were circulated to the relevant agency staff. They provided comments, and the final versions before you in attachment C reflect all comments received. These are what they look like in attachment C. So what's next on the project? Assuming the action item before you is approved today to finalize these 10 zones, we're going to keep trucking to keep this project on schedule, and are really focused on developing a list of prioritized projects within each zone that address the transportation challenges that have been identified so far. So we need to develop a prioritization process and do some project ideating with the community and with the agency staff. That'll happen through the summer, and you'll have some information and action items from me later this year. So to close out, the staff recommendation, which the Transportation Committee supported, is to designate all 23 mobility zones and to adopt 10 of them as phase 1 zones, including the refined boundaries included in attachment 3. Now, I've been serving you long enough to know that there are 28 jurisdictions sitting around this table and only 23 zones and 10 phase 1 zones on this board action before you. So I'll just remind you that the idea of this project is that these 10 places will be pilots that we can learn from and apply those lessons in other places. So when I'm sitting in a conversation in South Yuba City about the challenges of serving an old part of your town and a new growth area, I'm also thinking about Folsom and Elk Grove and Lincoln. And when I'm in a conversation on how you change Folsom Boulevard from a car-oriented corridor to something that's a walkable heart to the community, I'm thinking about Pacific Street and Truxell and Sunrise. And when I'm up in Brownsville, hearing about multiple generations who have lived in a hyper-rural place long after the logging industry has left, I'm thinking about the challenges of Colfax and Ileton. So while these 10 might not necessarily be your individual jurisdiction, I'm confident that the lessons your staff are going to learn are going to bring a lot before you today. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Any questions from the board?
If I could, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
Dr.
Kathleen,
Vegas.
could you just share with me maybe how you identified the mobility zone in West Sacramento, the Bright Glide? Because the boundaries have moved a little bit. I think I have my own definition or my own sense of kind of what I think of when I think of Bright and Glide, and it just didn't align, and I'm just curious.
That's right. So we had identified a sort of general area in West Sacramento that covered both the Bright Broderick, which is sort of north of Sac Ave, and more of the southern sections. And there was a lot of discussion on how the communities in Bright and Glide connect to a lot of the resources that are developing in the Tower District and the higher frequency transit that's running in the more kind of central part of West Sacramento. But also a lot of discussion on the walkability challenges as the highway cuts through. So we opted in partnership with West Sacramento staff to have a zone that was more kind of on the western half, gave it the Bright Glide name to sort of address the fact that we're not going all the way to the river on the north half.
Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, I'm going to move on to public comment. I just have 2 speaker cards in front of me. First, Mike Costa with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. See you again, Mike.
Thank you, Chair Sunan. Good morning, members of the board and public. My name is Mike Costa. I am a principal transportation planner with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. As a member of both this project's technical advisory committee and its supporting task force, I would like to acknowledge appreciation for the true collaborative approach taken by Kathleen and her project team for this extensive planning effort. As Kathleen had mentioned, many stakeholders were actively engaged throughout this project work, and a variety of factors were considered when narrowing down the original 23 mobility zones down to 10 zones that are being identified and recommended for the board's approval this morning. In working together with local and regional representatives throughout this process, it is clear that while these 10 zones provide a great start to to improving transportation mobility in their respective places, there are many more opportunities throughout the region as identified in the other 13 zones not moving forward that should be considered in future planning efforts and/or subsequent project phases when funding is available. However, in the meantime, it will be very exciting to continue working with SACOG and our local regional and regional partners involved in this project to develop projects that advance multimodal solutions for addressing a diversity of needs and challenges in a wide range of settings that can be ideally replicated and/or adapted to other areas throughout the region in the future. Again, thank you to the SACOG board and SACOG staff for leading this regional planning effort and considering the thoughtful input and perspectives from the many stakeholders involved in this effort to date and in moving forward the 10 identified zones forward today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Kevin Busey with Sacramento Transportation Authority. Good to see you, Kevin.
Yes, good morning. Kevin Busey, Executive Director of Sacramento Transportation Authority. Just want to highlight, I think it's been a joy to work with Kathleen. She's very diplomatic, and she works with everybody, try to understand their interests and try to come up with a compromise that everybody would be happy with. And so it's been a great process for me. I think everyone felt like they were heard as part of that process. And I was part of one of the committees, obviously not part of all of them, but I think the process went really well, and I appreciate the level of depth that maybe SACOG went into with this particular planning effort. More detail than really I've seen in prior efforts by SACOG. So this has been a great effort, and I'm looking forward to see what happens with these 10 zones. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any
Chair
other
Soon, I do
comments?
have a comment to read into the
Oh,
record, if that's all right.
Yes, please. Thank you. That's
Thank
right.
you. This is from Adrian Rain with Valley Vision. She says, on behalf of Valley Vision, a civic leadership organization working towards economic prosperity, social equity, and environmental sustainability for all residents in the Sacramento region and a longtime collaborator with SACOG, I write to urge your approval of the staff recommendation for mobility zones adoption. As background, Valley Vision provided a letter of support to SACOG in 2022 for its successful RAISE grant, which enabled this innovative mobility project to take place. We have served on the Technical Advisory Committee since the start of the project and considered the community and agency dynamics that led to the identification of 23 mobility zones across the region and proposed adoption of 10 for Phase 1 implementation. These urban, suburban, and rural communities demonstrate significant demographic needs and data-driven transportation challenges. As a 501c3 not-for-profit organization involved in cross-sector coalition work across the region, we've been impressed with the collaborative nature of the work. SACOG and its partners at STEER and Civic Thread have utilized a sophisticated yet common-sense methodology to identify and prioritize zones, including a thoughtful needs assessment. Given our very positive experience serving on the TAC, we again urge your approval of the staff recommendations to enable forward progress on this important work. Thank you. And that concludes that comment.
All right. Thank you very much.
Chair Sen,
Yes. Director
I'm,
Halberstam.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay.
And as I make this motion, I want to thank staff for their good work. They know I had some concerns regarding the North Auburn area and work that Placer County Transportation Planning Agency is doing. I appreciate the opportunity to really drill down and understand where these align and don't align. And I think it's a really healthy process. So as the other speaker said, this has been a really masterclass in collaboration. And so I move this item.
Second by Baines. Thank you. Motion Director Haldershot and second by Baines. Before we go to the roll call, I just want to highlight again and echo sentiments that were just expressed. That I'm not calling it new, but I will say, maybe we're newly recognizing just the amount of outreach and engagement, James, you and your team are doing, and just like for the last item. And I think we're never going to be, I'll call it perfect, or we'll not be in agreement and everything, but the fact that you're listening, you and your team are going out there and hearing not just all of us, but all the stakeholders that we have, from whether it's all our board member staff or their communities, it really goes a long way, as you can hear from the comments today. So kudos to that, and really like seeing this culture here at this organization.
Chair Stern, I want to echo that by saying this has been great work by staff, some of the most intensive, as you have just heard. But I think I also want to connect the dots. This is about taking something like equity and disadvantaged communities and not having it be a one size fits all, right? Having it be locally determined, using our data, but local values. It's why we're now moving the board meeting around the region, going to different counties, so that you all understand the diversity of this region, right? In every way, in every sense of that word. So we appreciate that. Obviously, this approach takes longer, as you all know, because you're in elected office, when you're doing sort of meaningful and local engagement. But I hope you pick up a theme here that we are really making a very intentional effort to knit these 6 counties together in all of our jurisdictions, as diverse as they are, through this work, so that it can be more impactful at the end of the day. So thank you for recognizing the staff on that.
Yeah, for sure. With that, can we do a roll call vote, Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Director Andreata?
Yes.
Baines?
Aye.
Boomgarden?
Aye.
Bradford?
Aye.
Rollins for Branscombe?
Aye.
Houlihan?
Aye.
Chapdelaine?
Yes.
Chapman?
Aye.
Ring for Clark Kretz?
Yes.
Clarici? Absent Desmond?
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo?
Aye.
Early?
Aye.
Haudashelt,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Jones,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Kozlowski absent, Lauren,
Aye.
Maple,
Aye.
McCully,
Aye.
Rodriguez,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Teeter, Veerkamp, Vega, Villegas, Vice Chair Gallardo,
Aye.
and Chair Soon.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, glad to hear. We're ahead of schedule, folks. So,
No problem.
not for us, but our speaker isn't here yet, so our workshop.
Our workshop, Chair Soon, our workshop speaker is absolutely here.
Oh,
The
okay, good.
transit, so just to be clear.
Oh, I'm
We have
sorry.
a transit lunch for everybody,
Oh,
but
that's-
really focused on the 16 of you who
Yes.
serve on. That speaker cannot be here before 11:30. You may need to use a very uncommonly used trick called a recess. But I'm guessing, given this body, you may well be talking to 11:30. So we
Okay.
do have our workshop speaker here.
All right, thank you. I jumped the gun on that. Yes, let's go to our workshop then. Potential of on-demand microtransit lessons learned from recent research. And Director Quellis, please kick us off.
Thank you, Chair Soon. It's my pleasure to welcome a distinguished speaker we have this morning, but I also want to do a little connecting the dots here, right? You've heard quite a bit from us the last few months on transit around the region. You had Christoph Spieler come to the board meeting last month in April and talk about how lessons learned, right, about building effective, reliable transit, and frankly, why our region needs it, but also the lessons that we have to learn that are really important. And that, I think, with a lot of very good feedback on that. This is sort of the second, if you will, in a series around transit. This time, we're going to talk about microtransit. And our speaker this morning is going to define that for you if you probably heard this term. And here's what I want to say, and before I set up the speaker, a lot of our communities are actually now experimenting with on-demand microtransit. So shuttles, vans, small vehicles on demand, right, to replace a lot of our suburban, small town, and even rural routes. We are very aware of those experiments going on. We're very aware of experiences with some of our agencies around the cost of microtransit, the cost per ride. But I think what I want to keep you all holding this morning in your heads is, yes, it's a higher cost. What are the ingredients that could make it successful so that it's worth a higher cost? In other words, you're giving people more access, the access to the things they need to get to every day. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Susan Shaheen. I've known Dr. Shaheen for quite some time. She is professor of civil and environmental engineering at UC Berkeley. She has, over the last 2 decades, honestly been a pioneer in the research around shared mobility, car sharing, microtransit, autonomous vehicles, working with the automotive industry, working with communities, big, small, urban, rural, across the United States. And we asked her to come here this morning to share, again, some of that research and some of those lessons learned, so that as all of our communities are experimenting with this, we can really learn from somebody who has been in the trenches and working really hard on this topic. So without further ado, Dr. Susan Shaheen from UC Berkeley. You can applaud. I think it's okay.
Wow, that's uncommon. I don't often get applauded. Anyway, good morning. Thank you so much, James, and thanks for the kind invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you about microtransit. So it's a topic I've been interested in for a long time, and got the pleasure of, I think, actually naming it microtransit, and it stuck. Sometimes you do that, it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. I've researched the very first system called KC Transit. So it Ride KC in Kansas City, and that's where the ride started for me. So I'm going to just give you an overview. So one of the things James and I spoke about was to just make sure that we spend a little bit of time on what the definition is of microtransit, and talk to you about the distribution of these services across the US. They're everywhere. and also get into the use cases because there is a diversity of use cases along with variations in the models and in the operations. The particular research that I'm going to present to you today comes from a doctoral dissertation that was completed about a year ago, where we really did look at the operations, and I hope that this will be quite interesting to you. I found it absolutely intriguing. So I did this at a national scale. A lot of people say to me, we spend so much time on pilots and pilots have importance, but we only walk away with understanding, say, from one individual pilot. So this particular research actually scales us up to a national basis, which I think is a really neat thing for us to think about. I'll end with some key takeaways from this particular study and then just conclude with acknowledgements and be happy to open up a discussion. So microtrans has been with us for a very long time, around the 1970s. And as James mentioned, it is an on-demand type of service. At present, it's known really as microtransit, so that terminology did stick, but many of you may know it from other names like paratransit or even some types of shuttle services of the past. And so it gives us the opportunity to scale down essentially a transit service, make it more dynamic, although you can see fixed route microtransit services and pool the individuals in the vehicles. And so that helps us in reducing vehicle miles traveled, excess deviation in some cases, in pickup and drop off, and also leads to energy and environmental benefits in many cases. So most of the rides are dispatched and paid for paid-based systems via smartphone, and a number of them, particularly building off of the paratransit model, include telephone booking. So few services accept cash, although we do see that in some special cases, acting more similar to a taxi type services, but by and large, we're moving more and more away from cash-based services. So as I noted earlier, sometimes you will see fixed schedules and routes that operate much like a bus type services. And we also see these much more dynamic, large-based services overall. So the use cases that I've been tracking and categorizing these services by include everything from first and last mile connectivity to public transit. So the shuttle is really focused on that. Low density or suburban, which I think might be of interest to you. I think microtransit is really showing up in these types of locations as well as rural. And off-peak late night service. So think about gap filling. So you've got a traditional bus service, but maybe it's not operating late at night. Paratransit, I've mentioned that, and then more specialized services. So we'll see them in closed campuses, social service models, or non-emergency medical transportation services. We're seeing actually some degree of experimentation and blending some of these service models, and some of that looks at really just trying to increase the ridership level as well as the overall cost effectiveness. So they vary in many different ways. So they can be quite small in terms of a few square miles to over 5,000 square miles. They can be over 30 vehicles or under 30 vehicles. So lots of different varieties. And I think that's one reason why getting some high level, macro level understanding has been particularly challenging, because it's not a one size fits all style model. I think that's actually the beauty of it. What I'm going to really focus on today with you, which is something that most people have not really focused a lot on, I think, in discussions, is what's the operational model? So what I'm going to take you into today is the analysis we conducted on zone-based and point deviation zone-based. And where might we be able to gain some operational efficiencies by looking at the comparison of those on a large statistical level? So your fleets can be sedans. So think of Uber, Lyft. You probably remember, you know, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of interest in seeing how Uber and Lyft could fill these gaps. And some transit agencies were a little turned off by that due to lack of interest in sharing data and whatnot. And I feel actually the microtransit movement kind of grew out of that pushback of public agencies and public transit operators saying, you know, why do we need these guys who have these secret sauce algorithms operating these services for us? Why can't we do it ourselves? And that was, I think, a real inflection point and an important one for you to know about. And that really spurred my interest in really getting deep down into this particular mode, because I was actually seeing these pop up in suburban locations, in rural locations, and I was seeing transit operators and public agencies actually standing up these services themselves, not thinking of this as an outsourced model particularly, although we do see that, but it's much less common today than it was even 10 years ago. Wheelchair accessibility is something that many of the services include, but not all do. This has actually been a pretty controversial area for some of the early startups, like Chariot, who you might remember in San Francisco, who was very famous for having fancy drinks in their vehicles, and they made a point of taking the the wheelchair accessible space out, and it didn't take long before the public backlash shut that program down. So they were one of the very, very first. Fare payment, I've already addressed that. Very few accept cash. You can do on demand or pre-booking. Fleet management, it can be your agency itself doing that or an outsourcing to third parties. Again, we see a whole diversity here. In terms of workforce, we also see individuals that work for a public transit agency becoming the drivers in some cases. And then in fewer cases, we're seeing them outsource or contracted. So hopefully this provides a good backdrop for you of these types of services. I don't know if I want to take a moment to see if you guys have any questions on just the basic concept before we get into the data and the modeling.
Any questions for Dr. Shani? Oh, Dr. Hume, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question so that we're all on using the same vernacular. Is microtransit and on-demand transit and first mile, last mile, are these all interchangeable, or are they different silos, or how would one parse them?
Yeah, great question. So in transportation, as you know, we use a lot of different terminology, right, that might mean the same thing. What I am showing you is the use cases that I would say are showing up in what I would define as microtransit. So it's all of the above. It's taking a lot of different forms, and it is very much an experimental phase. And one of the reasons I was so excited to come talk to you is I really want to encourage you to think about it as something that we have to learn to work with and grow. And so I think sometimes we stand up these systems, we cut the ribbons on them, and we expect them to be profitable and perfect from the moment, you know, we set them loose in the world. And I can tell you, as somebody who's put some of the very first pilots of anything in shared mobility on the ground, that's not how it works. But we tend to lose interest when we don't get these cost-effective economic numbers or points, right? And so I think instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, what I'd like us to encourage you to think about is how can we use data, help us understand how each of these services may be unique in those mobility zones, for example, that you just adopted if they have microtransit. I know you have it in Yolo County, right? And how can we make it grow instead of, oh my gosh, this didn't work in 12 to 24 months, which was the pilot period. Okay, let's move on to the next tech innovation. What I can tell you, because I study tech innovation, there's not a lot more tech innovations ahead of us, okay? I'm working actively on urban air mobility and advanced air mobility. That's probably the most cutting edge. Shared automated vehicles, robotaxis, right? We do see those, but outside of those, there's not a lot of other tricks we have up our sleeves. So I think what we should really do is focus on getting our hands dirty and figuring out how to advance these. But I hope that that addressed your question is it's a whole grouping of different types of phenomenon that many of us are experimenting by combining them to try to see if we can get at cost effectiveness a little better.
Does it,
Yes.
sorry,
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
yeah, so does it include a scooter that I pay for?
No. That would be micromobility. And I'm sorry about the confusion of the terminology.
Because I saw one of those go by me while I was sitting in traffic today and I was
Unless you're
jealous.
bringing two other people on it with you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't tempt him. He would.
Supervisor Desmond, come on ride with me.
Any other questions for Dr. Shaneen? Okay, yeah.
Just to make sure, because a lot of our board likes to have the. Thank you very much. A lot of our board likes to have the slide deck in front of you. So Lynette did email this to you if you want to follow along. You got it, and it's on the website. Everybody good? Okay. And I also I really appreciate what Dr. Shane just said there. I remember when Director Jennings, you asked us, actually, we were doing the quick builds, and you asked the board, are we a learning community, right? So just put your learning community hat on this morning. Yes.
I just have a comment, and I think it's pretty compelling, some of the things that you brought forward. And I want to sort of go back to what you said, well, why don't we do this ourselves as government? This is one of the things the private sector does really easily because they're nimble. Government moves very slow, is very conflicted on how some of these things are put in place. We have to embrace what the private sector is going to bring to the party and understand that as government, we're really not known for being terribly innovative. So that's something we really, rather than look at the private sector and say, well, we don't like the way they're doing this. They're doing it because there's a buck in it for them. And we don't think that way in government. So I think we really need to sort of re-examine where we can use a public-private relationship.
I totally appreciate the comment. I am merely telling you what I've observed in the field. So there was very much a strong interest in outsourcing when we saw Uber Lyft come along. And services like Via, Chariot, they are largely not operating the services anymore. They're back office. So most of the microtransit services do have a partnership with the private sector, but it, in most cases, is now more of a back office operation. So just a couple of things for you to think about. I'm just trying to explain to you what I see in the field is a bit of an evolution. I certainly don't want to take us back in time, and I totally agree. You guys shouldn't be developing apps. That's really not what government should be doing. But in this particular space, unlike your little scooters, right? The scooters are largely operated by the tech sector. Car sharing, largely operated by the tech sector, Zipcar, right? But this is a special case in the context of shared mobility. So at any rate, you all need to think about what's best for you. I'm not here to prescribe that at all. So what I'd like to do is dig into this particular study. This is, I think, unique in that it is not a necessarily like pilot-based evaluation. I have done probably 30 of these for the federal government at this point on microtransit at the case study level, the pilot level. What I really wanted to do with this particular doctoral dissertation with Alex Pan, Dr. Pan, helped me with this work. It was part of her doctoral degree. What we did is we wanted to see what kind of data could we get from the U.S. Department of Transportation, in particular, the Federal Transit Administration, and we realized that there was data that we could access through the National Transit Database. And what we found was we could get access to 144 systems that were considered full reporters. And full reporters have to have at least 30 vehicles in their system. So anything that I'm talking about has 30 vehicles or more.
But when we got to the data set, it was missing quite a bit of the variables that we needed. So we reached out to the 144, and what you'll see is that I'm working actively in terms of a model that we ran with about 32 of the data sets. So I'm getting more of the activity-based data on ridership and the types of operations that I need to run the model. So the research for this, to me, again, I've articulated early on, is I'm trying to understand, can we increase efficiencies, improve ridership, improve cost effectiveness by actually looking at operations? And what I think is there's a big lack of understanding. Some of the private sector companies are looking at this, but they're not widely sharing that with you, right? Because that's proprietary data. So this is, I think, a pretty unique study. You can access it. It's available. Looks like you have a question online, by the way.
You do see it. Okay, yes, Director Early, go ahead.
Hi, yes, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'll take this moment. You just mentioned, before you started getting to the second half of your presentation, the back office and organizations like VIA being more centered as back office. I just have a couple of questions on that. What exactly does that mean in regards to back office in this case? What capacities does that consist of? And then is there a world in which, rather than contracting with an organization that is largely doing back office, that you could skip the middleman and go directly to potentially those offering the service?
Yeah, so in terms of back office, it does vary. So if you were to contract with VIA as your back office provider, you would have a menu of options, right, to work with them on. Normally, the first place you start is with the app, right? You don't want to create an app. They have the app. It works really well. And then they can do everything from doing the geospatial analysis to help you define your zone. I saw you had that exercise with the consensus item you just adopted, right? They could do the modeling in a back office operation. They can also help with essentially the cost effectiveness or the revenue and analysis and the cost analysis for you. They go all the way to the line of actually providing drivers, which we see in the case of SV Hopper in Cupertino, who I'm currently working with. So it's a menu of options typically. And yes, there are some that go directly to the operator, but what I've witnessed over the last decade is those are seeming to dissipate. It seems to me, from just watching what's happening in the industry, it seems like they want to get out of the business of full operations. And I think some of that is workforce labor related, as say a transit agency might face issues if they don't use their own drivers. But this is not my opinion or my interest. I'm just objectively telling you what I'm seeing in the field.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Now I want to share with you a map. So I've done several of these maps over the years. This particular map shows you distribution of the data set that I'm currently working with. And again, what I want to share with you, right, this is not a bi-coastal phenomenon, which is what shared mobility used to be back in the day when I did all my beginning pioneering work on it, right? You see dots on that map throughout the United States. I have other maps because this is just the NTD data from FTA, right, that show even more peppering of systems throughout the United States. We do see this with micromobility, with the bikes and the scooters, by the way. Other types of systems are still more of a bi-coastal phenomenon, to be honest with you. And what you can see is the dots themselves represent that full database of those qualifying providers. And that's the 144. And then if you drop down, you can see the triangle represents the 32 where I was able to get our service area operations activity-based data in order to run the model. Okay. Oops. Okay. So zone-based and point deviation. So I'm going to get slightly technical on you. No, it's not really that technical, but I'm going to use a term called point deviation. You can see to the right with the pink image, that's a zone-based model. So there's one big zone, you can see that, but what's going on is that there's a point inside it in this particular case, which is a transit hub. So there's a scheduled time for pickup and drop off, and there's a scheduled location for that. And so I'm going to refer to that as point deviation. You can also think of it as an anchor point. If you look to the left, you'll see a pure zone-based model. In this particular case, right, it looks like it's one big zone. There is no anchor point happening with inside it, okay? And so what happened with this modeling was it led us to the conclusion that these systems to the right, which include an anchor point, are giving you a lot higher ridership and cost effectiveness, okay? And all the bullets just describe that. These are just two very different examples of what a microtransit zone looks like. So to the left, you can see a microtransit system, but there's 10 dispersed zones, right? So that's not too uncommon when you think of something maybe like more of a rural area. And then to the right, you see just one single zone model in this particular case, and it's quite large in nature. So next I want to talk about operational challenges, because this research is really giving you a conclusion around operations. A lot of the research that we're doing for the feds and also for the state of California on this particular model is looking at what are the issues. So poor connections to public transit. So a lot of the users are saying, hey, we got to get those connections nailed better. Because I try to connect to public transit and I'm missing that timing. So microtransit typically does not guarantee that timing. And that's why that anchor-based model is really an interesting one, because they're really focusing on that delivery. Long wait times. So this is a system I'm currently researching. It's called Richmond Moves. I sent a bunch of students out to ride in it, and they had long wait times because there were many people actually waiting for it, and they had a sedan-based model, so they had to wait for another vehicle to come pick them up. And so oftentimes these are things that are very difficult from an operational perspective to get right. And so what I've found over the years is once somebody has a bad experience with any type of shared mobility service or transit, they may be less inclined to use it. So understanding how to get our operations right is very important, and balancing that supply and demand is always a challenge. Balancing ridership and area size, so that right sizing I think is really important. So that's like how many vans should I have? How many shuttles should I have? What's the optimal service area for my needs? And I've already just shown you, right? There's different zone types for sure. And how can we make scheduling adjustments? How can we use modeling efforts and the back office operations to help us understand how to nail that better and to readjust the system? We can also use fleet and staffing improvements to improve operations, maybe bring some people in during peak period travel ideas, times of day, and also just getting better supply and demand efficiencies. And that can be done again in a number of ways. Your back office operators often have that capability, but also people like, my team does that. So I'm going to wrap us up with some, I think, really key conclusions from this analysis and this work, right? Which is we had a lot of different data that we ran through a random effects statistical model. We used the data to help us understand which variables or covariates had the greatest impact on ridership. And what we found was the internal variables, which are typically within the control of the transit operator or the public agency, had the highest effect on the ridership. In contrast to external factors like your population density, your vehicle ownership, your sociodemographics. So something that you might say, oh, that's out of my control. What we found statistically was that these internal operational factors and variables were the ones that had the biggest impact on ridership and cost effectiveness. So I hope I'm getting your attention with this. right? Point deviation services work better. Over half of them in that data set were point deviation models. It was very clear statistically that they were working better in terms of ridership than the fully zone-based models that had no anchor points. So we also think that there's an opportunity for a lot of the others. There were 48% in that sample who could have actually made a conversion because there was a public transit hub. But there were others who don't. And I think those are the cases like rural areas or maybe some suburban areas where you just are not going to have an anchor point. I'm working with Nairobi right now. They've honed in on some of the same understanding with their microtransit or Matute model. And what they're trying to actually do is build up land use, affordable land use points where you have shopping destinations, right? Think transit-oriented development, building those and baking them into the zone-based model to make it work better in Nairobi. So I think we're onto something here. And what I think is really exciting is to try to think about where those hotspots are and where we could maybe bake them into these microtransit zone-based models. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for policymaking to think about transit hubs. I know you're probably not strangers to those ideas. You're talking about mobility zones. How could you bake in this idea of the activity zone, activity center to maybe yield higher, greater performance and cost effectiveness? And then just the final bullet is there's a lot of room here for improvement. And like I said, pilots, it takes a minute to just get the thing on the ground. And so what we really need to do is kind of have an appetite to experiment, to grow, to learn, and modify these systems over time. And so I think that is something that I sense in this community. And I think that spirit of innovation and understanding and working with your pilots and having a mindset that you're going to get them beyond, their first 12, 24 months and do this ongoing simulation modeling or modeling work to better understand your operations. And with that, I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. Pan, who led much of this research that you just got to hear about. I'd also like to thank the University of California's Institute of Transportation Studies that funded this work, and of course, the Federal Transit Administration's NTD data set that we were able to access. And with that, I welcome questions or further discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Shanine. That was very informative. I have a couple questions. The one I wanted to inquire about for the point model, two things. One, in addition to shopping centers, which is intuitive, are there other things that could be anchor points? And then secondly, in relation to these point models, I recognize there's more utility in that model, but is there a limiting factor in the sense that people are going to travel around that anchor point, but it's not going to get them to the other side of the community? So is that a limiting factor?
Yeah, great question. So what we've found with the point deviation model is that by having an anchor point or multiple anchor points, it sort of made the whole system work better. Same thing happens in these shared systems like car sharing, right? Is you might have a pod or a hub for your car sharing vehicle, it's underperforming, but you have other locations that are higher performing. So overall, on net and on average, it makes the system, it just pulls the system up. Where it becomes challenging is, for example, if you have a rural area and this is the only form of transit you can provide, it may be very challenging to find a common anchor point. But we found in a lot of the cases in that sample set of 32 where we did the big deep dive, it was places like a Walmart that was really a big attractor zone for people who were shopping in a more suburban/rural area. And that was enough to pull it off. So you don't necessarily have to build out a mobility hub, right? Or do what they're doing in Nairobi, but looking for those areas that are attractor zones. I remember when I first moved to the Bay Area, I would take this airport shuttle. And I remember learning from Professor Robert Severo a long, long time ago that you always needed a common destination or arrival point, right? Or departure point in order to make a system like the airport shuttle work. That's your anchor. The airport was your anchor, right? So it's really, when I saw the results of the modeling, I was like, oh, I knew this. I've known it all along, right? But this is the cool part of research, right? Is the data speaks to you. So hopefully that answers your question. There are going to be cases where it may be very challenging to find an anchor point, and the cost per ride is just going to go higher. And that brings us to the question of, well, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater because it doesn't cost $17 a ride, it might cost closer to 40. But then we have to start looking at what are the accessibility benefits. And that's maybe a whole different lecture that I could come give you on the metrics of accessibility.
Yeah.
Because what we do find is that microtransit from the accessibility standpoint is giving people a feeling of safety. It's allowing people to reduce those multiple transfers or connections where they might not take transit at all because it's just brutal to shift from bus to bus. So it's filling gaps, and it's also providing ADA accessibility. So hopefully that helps. It's not going to work everywhere where you can place a point deviation anchor, but there's a lot of places where you might be surprised. People are all going to that shopping center.
Would you say things like hospital or college could be that?
Absolutely. So I'm working with Contra Costa County Transportation Authority. We have a shared automated vehicle shuttle, right? That's microtransit, right? It's just a robotaxi. Our anchor point in that particular case is the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see, it's like we've known these things for years, but we forget about them. But that was what made those airport shuttles before Uber and Lyft. That's what made them work. There was an anchor.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Shin? Yes, Dr. Sander.
I'm David Sander from Rancho Cordova. I'm a past chair of the Regional Transit District here in Sacramento. I've also been a national chair for transportation policy for the National League of Cities. So this is a very interesting presentation. I've been to Kansas City and kind of studied that network. And, I kind of came away from that experience looking at how they tried to deploy microtransit.
Yeah.
As that was like an inside job to kill.
It was an
off,
inside job. Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
unions didn't like it. Administrators, old school bus service didn't like it. So we're going to make this as costly and as inefficient as possible. And then, oh, darn, it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how common that kind of experience is in the industry, where we kind of fake set it up and then say, oh, no, we were right. Buses are the only one.
Yeah. I think all of these systems have to have a champion and somebody who's really going to stand up for these issues. If it's workforce, if it's, the cost per ride being higher. And so if you don't have that champion, then the data can be used against you very easily. So that's why, I make this comment about metrics. This is a serious tool that is being used to kill off these systems. These are not intended to compete with transit, I don't believe. It's to fill gaps. And so it's very difficult with a fledgling system for it to be coming in at $17 a ride, right? Average across the US right now on microtransit is 26. In this particular study, the average cost per ride with that subpopulation was $46. But we have to step back and say, like, are we just trying to look at this relative to public transit and ridership, rides per hour, or are we trying to look at other metrics in that context?
Right.
And so, Jameson Out, and I don't know if you know him, he really worked hard on Kansas City, Ride KC. And it was so early days. I was their evaluator. It was so early days. It was just really, really tough.
2015 or 2016, somewhere there.
Yeah, that was the first. And you can go to my website and you can actually see the report on it. There were so many things that were not, there were so many lessons learned that we walked away with. It's just like, does the community know it's there? I can't tell you the number of evaluations I've done where if we had done a better job, and I say we collectively as society had done a better job of exposing to people to what this service was, helping them learn how to use it, the ridership would have been really high. In the Kansas City pilot, so many people, they signed up for it, they never used it because they really didn't understand it. So some of it is so fundamental, just like education and outreach. And I see it in usually the first years all the time. Some stuff as simple as that.
We used to provide, well, we still do. We have paratransit service here in Sacramento, in Sacramento Regional Transit. A decade or more ago, we were spending, I think, $75 to $85
Right.
per one-way trip.
Right.
That you would call, you had to call a day in advance to schedule. It may or may not be there within an hour of the scheduled time. Could be an hour early, could be an hour late, could drop your location an hour earlier, an hour late. I mean, it was pretty abysmal service for $75 for a one-way trip. The shocker was 80% of the clients were ambulatory, meaning they could use any vehicle. It didn't have to be a paratransit vehicle.
Yeah.
And so at the time, it was like, boy, Uber one ways, it's hard to get over $20. You know, that'd be quite a trip. That'd be like one end of the area to the other somehow. And we're spending 75 for really
Yeah, no, I don't.
cruddy service, you know, so there's got to be a better way. And about that time, West Sacramento did a study
Yeah, I
Where-
actually did their study
with
too.
VIA,
Yep,
right?
yep,
And
yep,
it
yep.
was reported back to us, you know, we're going to spend 10% more with VIA and we're going to
Yep.
cut our average ride time by, it was huge, like 10 minutes or something. Or we could double our transit system budget with buses and lower it by like 3 minutes or 2 minutes. So it was like, this is the only way to go. We have to find more innovative, you know, adaptable ways to serve our populations. And everybody you're looking at in here is a suburban leader, basically.
Yeah.
Some of
Yeah.
us, you know, would like to think we have urban, you know, planning ideas. But in reality, all of Sacramento is a big suburban area, right? With relatively low densities compared to some other, you know, rural transit hotspots. So in that context, we have to figure this out, how to do this efficiently, particularly for our poorest residents.
I
So-
am totally focused on this particular mode of shared mobility and moving it into, you know, the robo shuttle model, because I think you're right. We have to figure this out. We have to figure it out. I can't tell you all the research I do in suburban areas where people say transit won't work for me. I can't spend 3 hours getting to my job. So I have studies where people are spending more than they make in an hour to take an Uber trip to get to the coffee shop where they work. So I'm convinced that we can learn how to do this better, but we've got to have like an all-in, you know, mindset towards it. And we can't have people trying to kill it off, right? We have to all go in, and I'm all in. I've been studied so many of these. Like I can't, you could probably name and I'll be like, oh, I evaluated that one. I evaluated that one. The thing I forgot to tell you, so thank you so much for raising this. The 32, those are all suburban microtransit. This entire study was about suburban microtransit. I forgot to make that point to you. So I was not looking at urban. I was not looking at rural either. These were all the 144, they were all suburban with 30 vehicles or more.
That's very helpful and good to hear.
Yeah, right. But like we gotta have this appetite to figure it out. So if, you know, you hit bumps in the road, you're gonna hit those. It's just the nature of learning how to provide these services.
Well, the good thing is you highlighted in your data, it's within our control that.
That's why, you know, when James invited me, he was like, you can talk about anything, right? I was like, oh, I want to talk to them about something that's in their control.
Yeah.
This is in your control.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions for Dr. Shani? Yes.
But I think you had mentioned this just in the answer to your last question, but is there data that shows that microtransit is taking over for fixed route transit, or are they not competing? They're just an addition to, is that right?
They're definitely growing, right? And so that was just one map. I have other maps that show even more so, but a lot of them are getting shut down because of lack of support and just, you know, the metrics. So the big metric that's used to kill them off is just to give the ridership numbers or the cost per ride numbers. Right. In an era in which we really need to think about affordability, right? These are things that can happen, is just to say, you know, $17 a ride on a bus is so much more cost effective. So So while some are popping up, others are closing down.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so is this something that you would implement when you don't have the fixed, and then when it becomes more cost effective, you would implement the fixed as the population grows, or is this something that you would just
Yeah,
permanently microtransit?
that's a really good question. I don't exactly know when, I'm not this far along with the modeling. So I have a big study that does simulation modeling. We don't know, we're actually doing comparison modeling right now. This study is not done yet. I'm happy to come back and talk about it, where we're comparing the microtransit against the fixed route and trying to make recommendations about stay out of the fixed route area here, let it just do what it's doing, use it here. But I don't know exactly where those points are. And then I have to look at all those zone-based characteristics. It's not necessarily something we can generalize. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate.
It's really tricky because the population is changing in microtransit across the US all the time. And I think where it is definitely feeling the most solid is where it's a transit replacement, or it's filling in a gap that never had transit. But when it's pitted against fixed route,
Apologies if I missed this earlier, but is there an average cost or investment per capita that successful models have done?
I'm just now starting with this new study. I'm leading a study with UC Davis and with UC Irvine. It's like all hands on deck because we all feel like this is really super important. And we're just starting to get at the cost data. Some of that cost data can be pretty difficult to get at because if you have those back office folks, they may not present it or give it to the transit operator or to the city or county. So that's a piece that's very difficult to understand. I think I'm going to need maybe a couple of years to answer that question, but it's a very important one because people like you need to understand what the costs are, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Dr. Sheen?
Chair Soon, can I just want to recognize as we again transition into our lunch pretty soon, we've got a number of staff and even general managers from the transit agencies here who we've invited to join us for the lunch session. I'm also going to do a very quick, and I'm going to get it wrong, so forgive me, be patient. I believe we have microtransit experiments or microtransit services happening with Yellow TD and Winters and Woodland, looking behind me. Knights Landing, there we go. West Sacramento, right, with VIA, SacRT Flex now with SacRT in Sacramento County, Yuba Sutter Transit with Yuba City, Marysville, Roseville with the Arrow, Auburn with ride hailing, the Tahoe Basin with TART, and Truckee, I think in Tahoe City in that area, at least, right? I probably missed some. Paratransit and what Tiffany runs with paratransit. So I just want to impress upon you, right, the timeliness of Dr. Shaheen being here, the transit topic in general. And I know we've had experiments here where we pulled back, right? And we've learned lessons. It's been too expensive. But I think as Dr. Shaheen is telling you, stick with it, right? We're not done learning yet. So anyway, I think we have a public comment as well that we.
Through the chair.
We do. We have one online.
Okay. We'll go to, I have two more questions here, so we'll go to online comments first, please.
Online comments first. Okay, great. Glenn Mendelkern, you are in the meeting and you are welcome to provide your comment. You have 3 minutes. Glenn, can you hear us? Glenn?
Okay, let's come back to it. Director Bradford, you have a question?
Just a comment, so on timeliness, so it's actually today that Yuba Sutter Transit is launching their mobility on demand microtransit service in the communities of Linda and Olivehurst, so it's really exciting. We have a ribbon cutting at 5:30 in Linda if anyone wants to come.
Very good. Director Sanders.
Most of your study is about public agencies doing this. Is there any equivalent work being done on the private sector side? Because sort of like my colleague over here, I think the public is going to be forever kind of handicapped in how we approach this. The labor rules we have to live under, the Federal Transit Agency rules we have to live under. We're not at all nimble. We don't know how to market. We can't quickly adapt to changing market conditions. We don't have the right partnerships to get
Yeah,
with people.
I
and-
totally
and
hear
get
you.
them Engaged.
Totally hear you.
But so it seems to me there's got to be more efficiency on that side. But are we unable to study it? I just rode Waymo, for example, in Phoenix. No driver, that would seem to be potentially a huge cost savings if you don't have labor to worry about in that sense.
Yep, that's why I'm studying robotaxis and these shuttle services, right? Contra Costa County has 2 different services that I'm evaluating for them right now. Okay, so the question of the private sector. The private sector is involved in the vast majority of these, if not all, that I presented in this particular study. And it's just that their role is less, I'm doing everything for you and you're outsourcing it. So there's these variations in how much they're doing. The 2 big companies right now that are players in this are Rideco and Via. And I think both are good. I've had doctoral students go on to work for Via and do some of the modeling. I do a lot of work with Via itself to try to help them understand what we're doing on the modeling side and the simulation modeling side to help bring that knowledge and understanding. I'm hoping they might hire some of my doctoral students to go help, because I think what we have to do is look at this as a public-private partnership. I really do. And I think the private sector does know how to do stuff that we don't. But one of the issues, right, I just raised is cost data. Oh, that's really hard to come by. Via's been very generous, as has Rideco. We're also evaluating Beeline as part of this study that I just mentioned, the current one with the 2 other UC campuses. So yes, the private sector is part of it. I think we got to work on those partnerships and really make sure that the back end operations, or if they're providing drivers, that there's accountability and that you're able to get what you need from them. I would say that they are, from my experience, much easier to work with than some other players in this space. But cost data has really been an issue for me on microtransit, because a lot of the entities that are providing it, when I ask them for it, they're not entirely sure, because they're, I think, relying very much on these back end office providers to have that part.
I think the other challenge for all of us is, as government agencies, we have to make that investment, and technology is changing so rapidly, right? I think none of us don't want to go invest in.
I
something.
don't recommend that you guys get into the app business. I really don't.
True, but it's just whatever infrastructure we put in place could be upended by new technology.
Yep.
And so those are the kinds of things we also.
That's where those wonderful partnerships, I think, can come in. I mean, think about 20 years ago, we didn't have the capabilities we do now. So yeah, I mean, I'm not in any way saying don't work with the private sector, but what I think is really interesting about microtransit is that the public sector is being, I think, more involved than just simply outsourcing, like a bike sharing system or a scooter sharing system or a car sharing system, right? These are other forms of shared mobility. The microtransit seems to be more of a partnership model, but we can always work on that, make it better.
Well, thank you very much again, and we look forward to seeing your update in a couple of years. We get more data.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Lynette, we've got the public member.
We do. We have the public member back, and then we also have a public comment from the audience. Would you like to take the public member first?
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right.
I don't see him up there. Is it? Oh, there. Okay.
Glenn Mendelkern, you're in the meeting now. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can. You are in the meeting and you're welcome to provide public comment. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Yes, I switched to another device. I'm very grateful for your presentation today, Dr. Shaheen. microtransit, and as I see it, has a lot of potential. I have a general question for people who design for transit agencies and transit planners. I wonder, might you have any kind of general guidelines as to how a transit planner or agency can make a decision between microtransit versus a fixed route approach? My reason for asking is that I've done some research into this. I've read the works of Jared Walker, and he brings up situations where sometimes microtransits can actually be a victim of its own success because as the more popular it gets, the more varied the trips can be, and sometimes that results in people not being able to book it.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe a fixed route would be better, but then you spoke about all the other issues regarding coverage. So I was wondering if you could have any guidelines that say, yes, let's go with microtransit, or let's go with fixed route. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Uh, the purpose of this existing study I have with the 2 other UC campuses is to really dig into complement versus compete and to really try to take different case studies. So we've got 2 in the Bay Area, Richmond Moves, SV Hopper, and Cupertino. We've got Beeline in it, and then we're running simulation models. So we're really trying to get at this question about where you do one versus the other or where you do both. So I just have to leave it that we know this is a very important question and we're trying to get at it, but I don't know the answer to it. But what I do know is one thing, is that when you look at an urban area, right, what we find is that when we put things like Uber Lyft in there or even a microtransit shuttle in there, there is a lot of competition with fixed route. So be it rail, be it a bus service. And so what we typically recommend is if you're looking at shared mobility modes in a very urban context, try to minimize the vehicle modes like the TNC, the Uber, the Lyft, the microtransit, and foster micromobility, which is things like scooters and bikes. The research I've done on this also suggests that as you get beyond that urban area into the more suburban area and peel back even to more rural areas, this is where the motorized forms of shared mobility should be deployed. Full stop. End of story. You're going to get competition with transit if you put motorized shared modes in there. Makes perfect sense, right? But that I know for sure. But this conversation is really about the trickier nut, which is that suburban context, right? And I don't know the answer to these questions yet, but stay tuned.
Good input. Next comment, Lynette?
Thank you. We have Autumn Bernstein from YOLO TD in the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Board. I just want to appreciate this conversation and having Susan and Dr. Shaheen and her research here. I think it's just really timely and really valuable. I will say for us, we are running microtransit service in Winters, Knights Landing, and Woodland, and it's been very much an experiment. And right now we're doing our short range transit plan and we're wrestling with like, where is microtransit working? Where is it not working? Where did fixed route perform better? And so it's all very top of mind for us right now. And I'll just share a couple of insights that I think might be helpful. One is that we're seeing in like some of our very rural communities that had very low quality fixed route service before, like Knights Landing, we are seeing much higher ridership on Beeline. And so we really see that it's working quite well. In other places, like in Winters, interestingly, we actually see that our fixed route service had much higher ridership before, particularly with connecting Winters to places like UC Davis and Vacaville, which is what our fixed route service, which is what both services do. So we're like, oh, maybe we need to bring back fixed route in Winters, but stick with microtransit in Knights Landing. So I'm looking forward to your research that you're going to be sharing with us on that. And then I will also say I really learned a lot from this presentation. One of the things we're struggling with is this point deviation concept and trying to implement that. Our provider RideCo does offer that, but we have found that it's very challenging to actually figure out how to implement. And so there's like, I feel like the industry is like hearing you about what you're saying is important. And I think, but it's not always like so easy to roll out. So that's something that, you know, we're trying to figure out, but it's so helpful to understand that clearly that point deviation is a lot better. So I think we'll be really taking that on and figuring out how to make that work. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Last chance. Any more comments or questions? With that, Dr. Shaheen, thank you very much. Great topic. Okay, we're moving on to our reports section. I have a quick report. I'm very pleased to announce that our city of Elk Grove, our young city, will be celebrating its 25th anniversary, our silver anniversary this July. So just proud about that. Any other board members would like to have any announcements or comments? Yes.
The Beal Air Show is coming up June
Oh, yeah.
7th and 8th, and I encourage everyone to come. The Thunderbirds are going to be there, and it's going to be a great weekend. So get on there and get some tickets.
Nice. Fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I know, Mr. James, you want to have a report as well?
Sure, Chair Soon. I'll round it out. And by the way, just also celebrating your silver anniversary and hosting the SACOG board retreat in October. So
Yes. Excited.
looking forward to that. Coming up on your calendars, remember we have sort of a late cycle. Typically in our month, we usually meet the third Thursday. So we're going to roll right into committees starting this Monday at 10 a.m. Policy Innovation Committee, and then next Thursday will be the Transportation and Land Use Committees at 10 a.m. and 1:30. Our board meeting will be a week early, but please make sure you are there. We have a pre-tour hosted by Director Desmond and the Sacramento County staff. I want to acknowledge have doing a lot of work to prepare for that tour. And the board meeting itself will, to make room for that tour, will begin at 10:15 a.m. at the Consummate Community Center in unincorporated Sacramento County on Cottage Way. If you want to know more about the tour, please RSVP to Lynette. And then we will be offsite in June. We will be back here in August. And in September, we will be in Wheatland, speaking of Beale Air Force Base in Wheatland and Yuba County. So looking forward to that.
Great. Any questions about those? All right. I want to quickly acknowledge SMUD Director Greg Fishman. I see he's out here. I know you're here as an RT member, but I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you for being here. And then, so next item is receive and file. If there's any, or unless there's any questions about receive and file, we'll proceed to adjournment. We've got our luncheon coming up with transit.
The chair soon.
Yeah.
You're not adjourning.
Oh, I'm
You're
sorry, we're
going
not
into
adjourning
recess.
because this is going towards it. That's right. Sorry. We're not adjourning. We're going to take a recess for 4 minutes before this luncheon with our transit managers. If you can stay, great conversation will ensue then.
And I'd say all board members are welcome, but particularly if you serve on transit agency boards, we'd love to have you for this presentation. So
yes,
see you soon.
Great. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Have a great day. No hand.
No, I gotta go. I have a dentist appointment. Yeah.
Okay, good, well, that's not even afternoon yet, almost noon. Hope you're all enjoying your lunch. I think we're gonna get this, our conversation started. I want to, kick it off to James for introductions, though, if you don't mind.
All right. Thank you, Chair Soon. I just want to say welcome to everybody. So we've got board members here from the SACOG board who, not exclusively, but many of whom serve on the transit agency boards. So you wear multiple hats, we know that. Just like Chair Soon's hat over there. We're gonna get you all one of those. Come on, you gotta, there we go, there we go.
Yeah.
That's his SACOG hat. He pulls that off and puts it back on and puts other hats on. So anyway, we've got board members who represent transit agencies. We have general managers and staff from the transit agency. We have a lot of challenges to get through as a region around transit funding, but we've got tons of opportunity. One of our challenges, frankly, is the state. I know I'm going to shock you by saying that. And even the, let me say it again.
Never heard that before.
But even the budget and the May revise. And so we really wanted to bring you all together today. And I just want to sort of recognize this is the majority of SACOG board members who also serve on transit agency boards. So you're important. And together, working across your agency boards, there's a lot that you can do. Because you have relationships, because you are local leaders in your community, because you know your state legislators, and of course your congressional representatives. But today we're going to focus on the state. And I've asked Michael Pimentel, who's executive director of the California Transit Association, CTA, just upstairs in our building. So it's a nice short commute for him to come down and give you a little bit of an update on the state of play in California for transit, and then specifically the state of affairs in the legislature. And I think even as of the last week with the May revise, the very real challenge that sits in front of all of us. So Michael, good to have you.
All right, well, thank you, James. Thank you, James, SACOG board, for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm going to give a presentation providing an update on Transit in California that touches on some of the challenges and the opportunities that lie before us. And before I jump into that more formally, I want to give you a little bit of background on who we are as an association, who we are as an organization. And I'll just note for you that we at the California Transit Association, we're a 501c6 trade organization that represents California's transit industry in the halls of the state capitol. We have 220 member organizations, and all that includes 85 transit and rail agencies here in the state. And as I look around and see the general managers for the transit agencies in this region, all of them members of our California Transit Association. And our central charge is to advocate for policies and funding solutions that support and advance the mission of improving public transit in our state. Over our 60-year history, we've been involved in quite literally every major state level policy and funding conversation with the state legislature, and have achieved some major victories, and they're noted for you on your screen. We led the charge in the enactment of the Transportation Development Act, giving us a state transit assistance program, the Local Transportation Fund, which together created the lifeblood of public transit funding here in the state. We led the charge to include within SB1, which was first a Fix It First Roads program, to include $1 billion in annual support for public transit. And then most recently, we led the charge with the legislature to enact SB 125, providing transit agencies with one-time relief from pandemic-related cost impacts, to allow for agencies to address operational shortfalls and to ultimately build the transit system of the future. Now, over the past 5 years, our work has taken a decidedly specific focus, and that is, it is largely focused on supporting California transit and rail agencies in navigating the COVID-19 pandemic, and supporting them as they charted a path toward recovery. Now, as presented here, this recovery is well underway, with agencies in the state now posting ridership figures that are upwards of 85% of their pre-pandemic levels. And I'll note that that's the national average. During my presentation, I'll highlight some of the work we led to get us to this point in transit agencies recovery, highlight the work we are leading now to carry the industry forward toward a better future, and close with some observations that build on the remarks you heard just now from your executive director around a major threat that we now face here at the state level relative to SB 125 and cap and trade funding. And so let's begin. The association's advocacy efforts, as scoped at the start of the pandemic and refined over the last 5 years, have focused on 3 priority areas and moving forward in really 3 steps. The first is stabilizing transit funding and preventing a collapse of our transit systems. The second is enhancing transit effectiveness and attractiveness to support the riders we had throughout the pandemic and to win riders back to our systems. And then third, changing the discourse around public transportation here at the state level to increase state support for transit services. And here we mean both funding and statutory support. And the theory behind this approach and this specific effort was to establish a financial runway for the agencies to ride out the worst of the pandemic, to allow for their services and their finances to level out. And then ultimately to build the space for transit agencies to institute the necessary reforms and improvements to their systems to obtain financial and operational stability, while also building in this third step, the awareness and the action necessary to address our nation's and our state's chronic underinvestment in public transit. And I'll note that in 2020 and 2021, aligning with this first step in this 3-step plan, this meant pursuing federal relief through what became the CARES Act, CRRSA, and the American Rescue Plan. And our efforts aligned largely with the federal efforts that were underway through our partners like the American Public Transportation Association, the Community Transportation Association of America, in delivering ultimately in those 3 rounds of federal relief, monies for transit agencies. And in California, that meant $10 billion in fund support for transit agencies to allow them to move past the pandemic. Now, in parallel with these efforts, our association did lead state level efforts to secure a much narrower form of relief. A lot of this was focused on what we have framed as statutory relief. This was an effort focused on providing agencies with funding certainty for their state sources, providing relief from performance metrics that would have penalized us for a drop in ridership. Think of fare box recovery as an example. And then adding, wherever possible, funding flexibility to direct our programs that usually have fairly strict parameters toward more flexible, more generous ends. And you can think of, for example, our low carbon transit operations program, long focused on increasing service. During the pandemic, we were in a position of maintaining service. We worked to provide flexibility in that fund source. Now, combined with that federal relief that we were able to secure with our federal partners, this state statutory relief carried us forward as a California transit industry through at least late 2022. And it's in that timeframe that became evident that the federal relief efforts were, in short, misscoped. We had anticipated the pandemic would be well behind us. There was the Omicron surge that led to a pandemic that was drawn out. And so those monies that were provided with a specific runway contemplated proved to be inadequate. And so the work that we then did was to pursue with the state what became SB 125. And I think all of you in this room know the parameters fairly well. $5.1 billion for California transit agencies that is delivered between fiscal years 23-24 and fiscal year 27-28. To secure this relief, this was an all hands on deck effort led by my association. It was engagement with our legislature, engagement with the Newsom administration, one-on-one meetings with them, long format committee hearings, presenting the case to the legislature in a landscape that I'll note the state was facing a tens of billions of dollar budget shortfall. And so the success on the $5.1 billion, a marquee win for our association, owes a lot to the mobilization of our agency members, those in the room, also regions like this one. And as we faced this pursuit, there had to be an effort that really punctuated the level of support that was necessary and what we would be doing with the money and what we would be doing on improving our systems to justify that level of investment. And so as we work to secure those monies, a lot of our focus then turned into this next step of enhancing transit effectiveness, Win Riders Back. We heard very clearly from the legislature, the monies that were to be provided were going to be provided on a one-time basis. And they wanted to see improvements from our systems in order to demonstrate that we had made progress toward shoring up, again, our fiscal challenges, our operational challenges to carry us into the future. And the initiatives that we have led over these last few years have largely focused on the items on your screen: transit safety, project delivery reform, and transit priority. And I'm going to go into a bit of each, just staying high level in my remarks as we then move into that conversation on the challenge that is before us. So on the transit safety front, I'll note that we have been working to address safety across two lines: safety for our riders, safety for our operators and our frontline employees. On the rider front, so much of the discourse has been around the particularly negative experiences that certain demographics of our ridership experience every day as they ride public transit systems. We're talking about women, we're talking about folks from the LGBTQIA communities who experience, and the research bears this out, disparate levels of harassment, violence on our systems. And we worked on that issue in partnership with a number of local advocacy groups organized under the Stop AAPI Hate coalition to create, for the first time, requirements on our systems to begin to survey those instances of harassment and violence, and to begin to think through strategies for addressing those incidents for these particularly vulnerable populations. And in moving that effort forward, again, against a difficult budget landscape, we were able to secure monies for the agencies to actually move forward with survey work that serves as a predicate for what may be those implementation actions in the years ahead. We also, this year, are pursuing an effort to provide our transit workers with some additional statutory protections. Here we are recognizing that for far too long, our frontline workers have been subject to violence from riders. And granted, it's a small subset of our riders, but the experience is real, the experience is visceral. It is something that is not only a moral imperative to address, it is something that from a human resource perspective, we need to address because it is having an impact on recruitment and retention of our operators. And so what we are advancing this year is a bill, AB 394, that would enhance the statutory protections for our frontline workers, increasing penalties, providing those enhanced protections across all transit employees and contractors, and then finally, giving us the ability to seek and then secure from the courts a prohibition order that can be applied system-wide. Now, we're not approaching this with a cavalier nature. We understand that for many in this space, the conversation about prohibiting folks from our systems, a difficult one, but what we're trying to develop is a very narrow approach that makes sure that only the most violent actors are kept off our systems. We're doing this in concert with the Amalgamated Transit Union, the Teamsters, with Smart TD, and the California Labor Federation in helping to advance a unified front. Now, we're also working very diligently on project delivery reform, here recognizing that historically, things like the California Environmental Quality Act has been weaponized against clean transportation projects. We had established in 2020, later extended in 2022, and are now looking to extend permanently in 2025, a series of CEQA exemptions for clean transportation projects. The focus of this is making sure that we're delivering our projects sooner, on time, and on budget, and that as we are delivering these projects, we're focused on projects that are delivering to our riders faster and more efficient service. And this work speaks to, in particular, the following types of projects: transit lanes, part-time transit lanes, like bus on shoulder projects, and other transit priority projects, as well as much larger projects like the build out of bus rapid transit systems, light rail systems that have dedicated right-of-way that can begin to demonstrate a travel time savings, travel time benefit toward riding public transit. And what we're seeing in the state is that this has been leveraged at this point by more than 100 projects statewide. Largest project to have taken advantage of this. At this point, bus rapid transit and dedicated busway on the Central Coast that will be establishing a 50-mile dedicated right-of-way for services that connect some of the poorest communities in our state. Now, as we move forward, I do want to recognize that part of this conversation is not just building the infrastructure, it's making sure that that infrastructure is delivering on its promise. And it's here that we have focused heavily on transit priority measures. So here, I'll acknowledge the bills that I've referred to in passing just now help us deliver things like dedicated bus lanes, dedicated part-time transit lanes. But one of the things that we often find is that as we build them, too often, the efficacy of those projects is stymied by folks who frankly park in those dedicated lanes. And so what we have advanced here is statute that allows for our agencies to use forward-facing cameras to document, to ticket those who are parked in our dedicated lanes. And I'll note for you that SAC-RT, one of the first agencies in the state to take advantage of this authority, is going to serve as proof of concept for us as we continue to move forward in implementation, as we continue to move forward into a conversation about continued and hopefully permanent authorities to run these types of programs. And then finally, we'll note that because we often share infrastructure with partners at the state and local level, one of the areas that we wanted to focus on as well was the state highway system. Of course, you all in regional and local government do not have control over the state highway system, but what we can bring to bear is greater partnership between the state, regional, and local governments. We help support a bill that was sponsored by our partners at Spur that would establish for the first time a transit priority policy for the state highway system. That work to develop and then implement that policy currently underway. Now, as we look to the future, I do want to note that much of our work is continuing to improve our public transit systems. This work largely being organized through the Transit Transformation Task Force. This is a body that was established under SB 125 and that was convened for the first time in December of 2023. It is charged with developing recommendations to the governor, to legislature, to grow transit ridership, to improve the transit experience. And this task force is being informed by a 25-member body, includes 12 members from the California Transit Association, including myself. And we are treating this as a break the glass moment to eliminate state and local barriers to effective public transit and to ultimately secure increased state support, both statutory and funding support, to carry our systems forward. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail. We've been meeting for now almost 2 years on all of what we've covered, but what I would highlight for you is that the areas where we're leaning in as an association focus on transit priority, focus on coordination between our systems, on reforming land use and housing policy to provide a greater base of support for our public transit systems, to deliver higher ridership and to have sustained transit ridership moving forward. And of course, part of that conversation on land use and housing focuses on transit-oriented development and concerns that we have long had around limitations in the Surplus Lands Act that precludes our ability to do larger forms of market rate and commercial development at our properties that we own. We want to acknowledge, of course, affordable housing, part of this conversation on delivering on TOD, but we have to have a suite of potential end uses to really have destinations for folks to travel to when they're riding public transit. Now, on the funding front, much of the conversation is focused on the short and midterm needs of the agencies, what's needed to maintain the levels of service that we have today, to grow into the levels of service that we know are necessary. And as you'll note on your screen, I have underlined, bolded the Extend Cap and Trade program. This is going to be the subject of our conversation in just a moment. But what I want to highlight for you is that we see significant peril ahead, not just in the receipt of new monies, but in the maintenance of the money that we have. And again, I'm going to go into more detail on this relative to cap and trade, but I want to highlight that State Transit Assistance Program, again, lifeblood of transit funds, by way of us transitioning to zero emission technologies across the medium and heavy duty sector and looking to push out diesel from those technologies, we are eroding the base of support for TDA, which is the sales tax on diesel fuel. Between now and 2035, we're going to experience about a 30% decline on that revenue unless actions are taken to find a way to rebound that. That is the focus of our effort here in shoring up the funds as we begin to have that conversation about prospectively new funds that can be provided. And as I close, I do want to spend some time, again, really punctuating this cap and trade issue that is now before us. James began to highlight the challenge that is before us. I'm going to go into a bit more specificity. So as foundational background, cap and trade has been with us since first the adoption of AB 32, Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. We had a cap and trade expenditure plan that was established in 2014 pursuant to SB 862 that largely directs on an annual basis about $4 billion for a variety of purposes, including those that are subject to continuous appropriations, high-speed rail, affordable housing, sustainable communities, the Transit and Interstate Rail Capital Program, and the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. I note for you roughly what those programs are investing on an annual basis. And then the cap and trade expenditure plan, because what is continuously appropriated represents only 60% of the pot. We have the remaining 40% that is subject to one-time, either single year or multi-year appropriations. That is one of the fund sources that has been providing for our formula TIRCP and ZETCP. Those are the monies that were provided for under SB 125, as well as programs like the TIRCP, where we saw an increase, an infusion of one-time money for what became TIRCP Cycle 6. Now, the reason we wanted to spend some time really talking about this today is that all of what I've just described, those continuous appropriations, those one-time appropriations, are now at threat, at potential risk of being lost due to the introduction of the governor's cap and invest plan. This was a new plan that was introduced as part of the governor's May revise on May 14th. What this demonstrates is a full reset of cap and trade beginning in 25-26. And what it's looking to do is to extend cap and trade through 2045, but then to fully zero base the expenditure plan beginning again in fiscal year 25-26 to include at this stage only the following two investments: $1 billion for high-speed rail, $1.5 billion for CAL FIRE. Everything on this slide except for high-speed rail zeroed out. And so what that means is that all other expenditures, if they are to continue, are going to be subject to discussion and negotiation with the legislature in what may be the weeks ahead, maybe the months ahead, depending on the timeline that is ultimately determined between the legislature and the administration. And I want to speak specifically for public transit, the monies that we have online and that are now at risk, TRCP, that is cycles 5 through 7 and all continuous appropriations of those dollars. Low carbon transit operations program dollars, all the continuous appropriations because those money's not yet committed. And then SB 125 dollars for formula TIRCP, that's in the immediate upcoming fiscal year 25-26. And then the ZETCP for fiscal years 26-27 and 27-28. Now, to give you a sense of the scale of what is at risk, when we've done the tally of of each of those appropriations, we find that the total between fiscal year 24-25 and 28-29 is just short of $3 billion. And I want to highlight for you that $2 billion from that $3 billion total has already been programmed by the state or regional governments for specific projects and services. And so if these monies are not maintained as part of this cap and trade or cap and invest plan, those projects, those services are all subject to either cancellation or potential significant scale back. This is something that for us is of the greatest concern. Now, before I move into the details on the budget math, I've done some quick calculation of what that means for your region specifically. My total looking at the appropriations for El Dorado, Placer, and Sacramento, $38.5 million. that is potentially at risk of being lost. And when I talk about these investment and what's at risk, I want to be clear, those items in red are those program level investments that are actually specifically outlined within the governor's budget as being zeroed out. There are documents that have been proffered by the administration that says elimination of funding for those programs. Those programs in yellow are those for which we see risk. So here you're not going to see the governor introduce language at this stage that zeroes out those programs, but they're at risk because what the governor has established is unfortunately a math problem. When you can consider all that has been continuously appropriated, all that has commitments through one-time appropriations, and you consider the new off-the-top investment for high-speed rail and for CAL FIRE, what you find is that the governor has overcommitted by almost $2 billion. At some point, there will have to be cuts to some programs. There will have to be trade-offs to some programs. And my message to all in the room is we need to work to make sure that we are not on the end that gets cut. And so as we move forward, I want to call for urgent action to support our efforts. We are live with press engagement, with direct advocacy with the legislature, a few snapshots of our engagement in legislative committees. We are meeting with legislators to have this conversation about the need to maintain these funds. We have issued our budget response letter. We have put out information to our members to speak to how they can be mobilized, how they can be activated to assist us. And where we are asking for support today is in engaging the statewide advocacy campaign directed at state legislature. As your executive director had noted, all of you have relationships with your state electeds. I would encourage you to be utilizing those relationships with your state electeds to highlight what is on the line for your individual communities. I think the point of concern that I have in this conversation is, well, I understand fully that the administration has stated, at least in our closed door meetings, their intent to fund public transit. We don't necessarily have a chorus of support in the legislature who is there to say, yes, we are going to stand up for public transit, so we need to get them there. And so want to focus that advocacy on identifying statewide transit funding needs, the funding that is at risk, but really the impact is going to be in localizing what those funding impacts are to your regions, to your communities. And then to the extent that you can, many of you yourselves, elected officials, if there are others on your councils, others on your boards who have relationships with legislators, we'd ask that you leverage those to make that contact, to make the message, and to really highlight the urgency of the need to do as we've highlighted here, maintain all existing GDR funding commitments through 2030, and then to maintain and increase those funding commitments post 2030. So not only can we maintain what we've got, but we can build into a larger and better future. And so one of the things that we'll be following up, I'll share this with James and his team, are the talking points that we've developed, the template letter that we've developed that can very readily be used by all of you in your engagements. And at this time, I'm happy to take any questions or comments from the board.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for being here. I have some questions, but I want to go to my colleagues first.
I just wanted to ask, and maybe they've already been furnished to us, but if not, I'd love to get a copy of the presentation so that I can share it with staff.
Certainly.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question. Going back to your funding priorities, the fifth bullet point was security, increasing security and addressing homelessness on the system.
Okay.
I was recently down in Los Angeles and rode the metro, and that was an issue. And they are addressing it. They literally had police board the train and asked to see the tap card for folks. But then when we arrived at Santa Monica, which was the end of the line, the ambassadors had to come on the train and literally shake people and wake them up and say, this is it, end of the road, vacate the train. So do you have any idea of best practices on how that can be addressed is my first question. Then the second question is here locally, I think one of our issues in struggling with how to improve the feeling of security on our system is the fact that it's very hard for a surface light rail to have a closed station aesthetic, at least to it. So if you could address those two things, maybe?
Yeah, certainly. And so what I'll note for you is on this front of homelessness on our systems. This is an area that we as an industry have been challenged with for really two reasons. One is, the issue, obviously a greater societal, greater systemic issue that even if we were to address in our system in one case or one circumstance, may again present itself hours, days later. But the heart of our challenge has really been the lack of direct funding provided to our systems to address homelessness as it's experienced on our systems. The state, as you know, has established multi-billions of dollar programs to address homelessness at the county level. And a lot of that is money that is then activated by continuums of care. But as we have approached the state and have acknowledged, we have systems that are multi-jurisdictional. We have systems that, while they may be outfits of counties, while they may be outfits of cities, don't have that direct line of access to funds. We have a circumstance whereby our agencies are quite literally having to raise their other operational dollars to address these incidents. And so we've been encouraging that the state provide direct funding support to the agencies so they can activate what are, and I think this starts to get into your best practices question, what may be direct ambassadors to help address homelessness on the systems, to help direct individuals who are experiencing homelessness to services that may exist within the regions, to navigation centers, to other forms of financial support to move them out of homelessness. And it's been there that consistently the state unfortunately has told us no. They have said to us, work with your counties, look to access those monies that are provided to them, but we are not going to be providing you with direct funding support. I'll note that is particularly a challenge, again, for those multi-jurisdictional agencies. Take a BART, for example, that runs through 5 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a situation where, because it's everyone's problem, it's nobody's problem, and no one has stepped up to provide them with that support. The other area where I think we have had some interest is in making sure that perhaps there can be some mandated coordination between the counties and the transit agencies. And it's here that we did have some success in the legislature in compelling that monies that are provided to counties for purposes of addressing homelessness should require engagement with the local transit agencies to scope their needs, to scope the potential support that can be provided, and to hopefully bring that online. But I'll note it stops short of requiring that support to be brought online. And then what I might want to refer you to as kind of a deeper discourse on this topic is we had worked in, roughly 2018 or 2019 when we started to see this issue coming to a head, and it had not yet broken, with the University of California Institute of Transportation Studies to do a fairly deep dive of our systems, survey of all of our systems, understand how they are experiencing homelessness, and to begin to develop some best practices that lean not only on what the agencies are doing at a local level, but also to explore what others are doing nationally. And so I may want to follow up with the SACOG team, provide that report, because it's going to go into a lot more detail on where agencies can be leaning in and what can be done. But I'll note that at this stage, we've largely seen agencies lean into ambassadors, unarmed individuals to do on-the-ground engagement, and then to direct folks to resources that may be available to them.
Dr. Maple.
Thank you. Well, first, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I certainly took a lot of notes because I learned a lot, and I'm really glad that an organization like yours is advocating at the state level for what we need locally here all around the region. I was also excited that a lot of things seem like things that we're doing, whether it be the cameras on buses, BRT, things that we're advocating for. So I'm glad that there's support at the state level to help us all locally accomplish those things. One thing two things I was interested in. One was my ears perked up when you talked about the weaponization of CEQA. I think that that's an issue not just for transit projects, but for many others. And just wanted to, how how much success have you found in that route in terms of getting some of these transit projects to be accepted? Because I know it's a pretty sticky issue in the legislature.
Yeah. And thank you for the question and thanks for the leadership in this region on moving so many of these strategies forward. I would note that on the CEQA front, we have largely found routine success with the implementation of these CEQA exemptions because they exist as statutory exemptions rather than just basic categorical exemptions. They're afforded an added level of concreteness or validity in California state law. I think the challenge that we find is that just as we have addressed one barrier in CEQA, we find ourselves facing another barrier in NEPA and then other barriers in state permitting processes. And so I mentioned, one area of very large scale success is bus rapid transit and busway in the Central Coast. While they were able to take advantage, become the largest project to utilize this exemption, their significant choke point was the California Coastal Commission. And so where we are now working is to move away from CEQA, and here I mean protect what we've got, these CEQA exemptions, continue to leverage them, but to build into other spaces, primarily the state, the local permitting conversations, and to discover whether there's a path forward on the NEPA front to try to accelerate the project delivery. And so what we've heard fairly consistently from our members, we're making progress. We've got to address these other barriers to make sure that we actually have an ability to deliver these projects on time and on budget. And so that's going to be an area of I would say, forthcoming engagement from us as we kind of progressively move through these barriers and hope to find a way to streamline success.
Little point there. There's a really good book. It's called Why Nothing Works that I read recently by Mark Duckelman, and talks a lot about the NEPA, CEQA, all of that. So really interesting. My last question, just briefly, was this came up in the micro transit presentation by Dr. Shaheen. I don't know if you were here for that or not, but she talked about is one of the challenges just to not just to the right micro transit piece, but also to just transit in general and getting the ridership that we need is often around the availability of like Lyft and Uber in urban centers in particular. And I don't know if that's something that your organization has ever taken on. I don't know what that would even look like, but is that a part of the conversation?
I would say it was part of the conversation about a decade ago when the technologies first entered our mobility landscape. I would say since then, the conversation's become a lot more recessed within our association. I think there's perhaps a bit of resignation to the reality that Lyft and Uber are here to stay and they are a viable option for many. I think where we have looked to focus as a way of kind of combating the supremacy of those services is by working to deliver improvements to our own. And I think it's here that so much of my presentation focused on dedicated transit lanes, transit priority measures. I think at some point in many urban centers, we're going to face a point of gridlock and just mass congestion. And these types of projects create an alternative that can prove to become a more cost-effective, time-effective option for people. And so it's there that what we're focused on is demonstrating the value proposition of transit. I've often said in forums like this, I mean, one of the best testimonies for public transit is being stuck on the highway system. If you're driving down 80 and you see that Capitol Corridor train pass you, you think I should be on that train. And we want to see that proliferate statewide in our urban centers. And again, begin to present that value proposition. That means less of a direct adversarial positioning with a Lyft and Uber. It's more of a strengthening of our own house to provide that other pathway for folks to consider and hopefully take.
Thank you.
I wanted to touch upon your call to action. Really appreciate that. But I think this group is like too familiar with across the street, and so I just wanted to maybe understand your broader strategy. I mean, we could certainly, in fact, James, we could engage the new Capitol Caucus through the Metro Chamber. I'm sure they would be happy to help out. But that would get you a lot of the regional legislators here, but everybody here knows that we're small relative to Southern California Bay Area. So, and then of course, when you add in the complexities of where's the budget chair and the speaker and all the protest, what does that landscape look like for you in regards to transit? And then finally, I would say, I could see a reduction of 200 million right now in that high-speed rail, and they still get a big chunk of money, and we could shore up ours, SB 125. So there's simple things like that, of course, but is there a condensed list that you guys have developed that you, as a negotiator, not that you want to negotiate against yourselves, but at least that you know that if you have that conversation, what that will look like?
Yeah, happy to speak to that. And what I would note is that our strategy follows really two prongs. So, first is the direct advocacy, the direct lobbying of legislators. And for that, our targets are focused in a very narrow pool. We're focused on leadership, so pro tem and speaker, budget committee chairs, the budget subcommittee chairs that oversee the cap and trade investments, and then each of the houses have working groups that they've established to work on these issues. And so the first ring, or the first circle of focus and impact is with those members. And so what we've been doing ourselves is that direct engagement, having those conversations with them to punctuate the need for us to maintain this funding, to maintain and grow our funding post 2030. And what we are looking for, and I can follow up the SACOG staff to provide this, are those additional touch points. Again, we'll be presenting the statewide picture, but that local story is ultimately going to be what's most compelling to get folks into that yes column. And so we are approaching this not just with conversations with you all. I have a call list of CEOs, general managers for the agencies in LA, the Bay, San Diego, Orange County, whereby I'm working through them to, one, make that urgent call for engagement, and then to ask them to be mobilizing their local electeds to have similar engagement to the type of conversation that we've had here today. The other area that we're focused on within that direct advocacy prong is to take a very broad-based approach. And so in this region, I would say a majority of your electeds are not in those positions of leadership or in these working groups, but there's still impact in having them from a caucus perspective raise the importance of this issue. I think one of the things I've heard that has been concerning is that in the assembly in particular, the general position that leadership believes they understand is that there is not support for public transit investments, whether those one-time monies that have been committed or long-term continuations of funding. And I think our work together needs to be to demonstrate that the caucus, in fact, supports public transit, is ready to move forward with funding for those purposes. And then the second prong that we're engaged on is public affairs. And so come end of this week, maybe early next week, I'll have my op-ed out in a statewide publication. We are looking for individuals from regions across the state to co-sign with us, to have op-eds themselves that speak to those localized impacts. And then we have built out a coalition, which I didn't speak to in my presentation, that is helmed principally by the California Alliance for Jobs. They represent a number of trade and construction groups. We are doing this in partnership with the California State Association of Counties, the League of California Cities, and then we have a base of business groups who are standing alongside us. They're going to help us with the ground game, helping to punctuate from a intersectional perspective the benefits of public transit. And so we're proceeding on this path. I'll highlight that because of the quickness in the introduction of the plan, how severe it was relative to our interests, it's requiring a very quick buildup of our own efforts. But over the next few weeks, it'll be increasingly enhanced to help carry us forward.
Okay, thank you. It's good to know. Is CalCog, I assume, is
CalCog is part of the group, yes.
Okay, thank
If I could just add, just for some specific context here, I just want to remind, in April, just last month, our board did just approve an allocation plan for SB 125. So to give you kind of a number of what is potentially at risk with those funds that were referred to, it's about at least $175 million to the region that could be at risk here as we move forward. So, as we embark on the long-range financial sustainability plan that is required under SB 125 that we're about to start in June, Plus, I know SACRT is starting and has just kicked off a COA and long-term plan. And Autumn, I know YTD is working on a short-range plan. I think, these conversations are going to be really important as we go through this, and definitely want to make sure that we're all coordinating here because that risk is real for everyone in the region, and we need to figure out how we can kind of overcome it and where we can support and provide information so that we can get, our story out there and told to try to help. So.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Autumn, Henry, how are you guys doing in terms of talking to, and Tiffany, all the sister agencies, not in just this region, but throughout the state?
So, Michael, thanks for the great presentation. And last couple assembly sessions about the budget, we sent a whole bunch of our staff to speak, and Greg, he's there, and every time he went there to just ask state legislators to help on this. I do have a technical question. Christine just talked about, SACOG board approved next fiscal year's SB 125. And so we have another, 100 million, whatever, for the year after next year. The first question is, do we need to, can we actually get that money, the year after this year, can we try to, through SACOG's board, action to approve that batch of the money earlier, so then we can get that money sooner? Or, the technical, I don't know how does that work. And the second question is, you mentioned, you did not mention which, the CTA has been very actively asking for another $2 billion for the SB 125 version 2.
Yeah.
And what is the status on that? I guess, we probably would not pursue that at this point in time, but okay.
Yeah, so on your first question, Henry, and thank you for the question. Thank you for the support of you and your staff and helping to move our advocacy forward on this cap and trade plan. But on your first question, certainly there could be administrative actions that are taken at the SACOG level to approve future year appropriations from SB 125. But what I would note is that action does not in any way help accelerate what will be then the release from the state. The action that can be taken, and we've seen this, for example, in the San Francisco Bay Area, the MTC has approved a 5-year program of investments from SB 125. But the reality is they can only move forward with the actual suballocation insofar as they get the money from the SB 125 appropriation. And so I would note, from a process standpoint, administrative standpoint, that can accelerate things internally, but have no bearing on the actual ability for that program to move forward. And so, provide only nominal benefit. I think on the $2 billion front, the landscape has just become a lot more challenging. And so when we first determined in January of this year that we would be standing alongside Senator Ottagin, Assemblymember Gonzalez in requesting additional resources for SB 125, it was with the understanding that cap and trade would largely be settled between now and 2030. And that really what we were talking about are potential programmatic investments that would start post 2030. And so with that as context, we thought if we can make the short-term ask and we then make this kind of midterm ask, now we're presented with two very dire short-term asks. And what I would emphasize is, while we are not fully walking away from requesting additional resources in terms of rank order, the balance and the decision I think that we have communicated to the staff is it's probably a stronger position to protect that money that we actually have in hand and that has been committed than it is to chase additional resources that frankly we were looking to breathe life into. And so we are placing a lot of our stock on the maintenance of what we have. We're still continuing to broadcast the need, the importance of getting additional resources. We still have champions, particularly in the Senate, who are looking to advance that request. But you'll see that much of our emphasis point is on the maintenance of what we have. It is in this budget landscape, I think, just a stronger hand to play.
Yes, Autumn.
Thank you for the question. I wanted to kind of respond to your question as well, Chair Soon, and I'll have another point I wanted to raise. We are very much tracking this as well and appreciate CTA's leadership on this. They have a legislative summit every year. It was just a few weeks ago, right before the May revise came out. So it was really helpful to have that focused conversation. So we've been reaching out to our legislators, and while our caucus overall is maybe not as powerful as some other regions of the state, we do have, of course, our Assembly Pro Tem, Cecilia Aguiar-Curry, who represents Yolo County. So we're hoping to make sure that she's a strong supporter protecting transit. The other point that I wanted to bring up, though, was around our zero emission vehicle mandate. We do have this mandate from the Air Resources Board, right, that we have to fully transition to a zero emission fleet by 2040, including starting next year. They're going to start restricting the number of non-zero emission vehicles we can buy. And so when we're looking at the situation where they're talking about taking away all of the funding that we can use to purchase those vehicles, clearly there's nothing coming from the federal government at this point with regard to that. How can we continue to have this mandate when all of the funding is essentially being proposed for elimination? So I know that's something that the association is working on as well, and I would love an update on that.
Yeah, I'll highlight on this increasingly challenging landscape for us as an industry. We've made significant strides in our transition to zero emission technologies. In fact, per CARB's own reporting, we are about 2 years ahead of schedule, and number of vehicles that we have on order or deployed relative to what they had built into their baselines for that ICT regulation. But what we're coming up against is the reality of federal funds, as Autumn has noted, that are largely not going to be available to us. And I say not available to us, not in a technical sense, but in a practical sense. They are still letting out with grant solicitations for the Lono, for the bus and bus facilities programs. But what we saw in the previous Trump administration is that the number of awards that were actually granted to California were often 1 or 2 awards per cycle, often not toward large urban centers, but rather to largely rural areas of the state. And so we're setting that aside as being technically available, practically probably not. And then as Autumn has noted, this cap and trade landscape, by zero basing the entire expenditure plan, eliminates some of the ZTCP, which some are using for zero emission transition, others are using for operations, but also crowds out the conversation around things like the HVIP program that has long provided vouchers to help buy down the incremental costs. And so we may be in a landscape where we don't have the formula dollars, we don't have the vouchers that are available to us. The cost impact becomes that much greater at a localized level. I'll add to that as more insult to this injury, the reality that this last week, one of our bills to extend a sales and use tax exemption for zero emission buses was killed in the California State Legislature. And so that's going to automatically increase your purchase cost per vehicle by between $40,000 and $80,000. And so we're in a landscape where funding isn't available, costs are going up, something has to give. We've been having pretty advanced conversations with CARB leadership for the last 2 years on this front, and I'll signal there is no interest at this stage from CARB in letting off the purchase mandate. And I think there's probably an acknowledgement then when all other industries have fallen, and by that I mean the regulations have not secured the necessary waivers for implementation, and there's active litigation around some of them, they've got to continue to make progress in some area, and I think they've determined that some area is public transit. And so where we are today is we're having conversations at a task force level. I've brought together a task force with CARB leadership, with CalSTA leadership, CPUC and CEC leadership. This is at an executive level to talk about what are the paths forward. We have talked about relief for the regulations. Again, that has largely been a conversation that's led to a dead end. But we've talked about additional support that can be provided, whether it's funding, technical support, and other forms of coordination to help us make progress. But I feel fairly comfortable in getting probably ahead of my own board that if we see a landscape in which these funding opportunities are pulled from us, we're going to have to accelerate and become a lot more vocal in a request for relief from the regulation. We cannot have an unfunded mandate, which I'll note has always been unfunded, that becomes increasingly even more unfunded. Not to the detriment of our system, not to the detriment of operations. It would not be a surprising, move or a pronouncement for us to pursue that, because we've been signaling our challenges with the regulation. But I would say certainly if this is what materializes, we're probably gonna have to take a more aggressive disposition. And that's just reality. And I would say in fairness to the state, you can't take away all of our funding tools and expect that we're not going to raise concerns about what that means for our implementation.
Have you secured a support letter from CARB for our funding? Just-
Sure, soon. I mean, I would just add on to that and maybe try to put the finer point on it. It hasn't been put on just then. At some point, if we're not already there with the operators, the zero emission mandate and clawing back money to not actually implement it is actually hurting our ability to grow transit ridership, right? I mean, these two things are in absolute direct conflict. And I know we feel like we don't maybe have the biggest, flex of the muscle or the caucus, but we do have a new capital caucus and we have other regions in California through Michael's CTA and the other associations with our regional councils. I don't know how we can't make this a really big issue, because we are gonna, if not already, lose ridership, right? Because you can't put enough service out.
So I think, it's a big issue we need to address this issue seriously. But it's now feasible and federal funding, federal funding funding where state is reducing funding. And you still ask everybody to change, to reach the goal to buy zero emission buses, which is 30–40% more costly. It's not good. Just reality.
That's daunting for sure. And and I only brought up that we are a small caucus, but the partnerships you articulated, Michael, I mean, that's good to hear, because that is what's going to take to move the needle. And the sister agencies in Southern California and the Bay Area, if all of you, Autumn, Henry, Tiffany, you all are communicating with them to raise awareness with their boards, I mean, that concerted effort's the only thing I think that will give us a broader platform, beyond any one caucus. So, I'm excited about this group. Thanks for convening us, James, because I think it's the first time, right? We've had the transit managers and our board members who are still on transit agencies together. I hope, this will continue forward, because there's a lot of opportunities, and sadly, congestion's even just building in our area, where transit will be a primary strategy for us to keep that at bay, or hopefully even make strides in reducing congestion. So more of this to come for sure. I guess if, are there any other comments or questions for Michael, or even just in general about our transit conditions in this area? Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, Matthew Malk with the Yuba Sutter Transit Authority. Just to put a little bit of a local personal face on the issues that Michael was pointing to with respect to the May revise. We're having to build a brand new operations and maintenance facility in no small part because of the mandate to transfer to zero emission vehicles and our inability to do that in our current location. We are, as it stands today, counting on upwards of $24 million towards that project from a combination of the SB 125 and the TIRCIP Cycle 6 funding alone. And I don't know that affordable housing and sustainable communities grants are even on the chopping block either, but we have $8.5 million in partnership with a local development in Yuba City that's going towards that transit. So maybe I'm wrong, and it could be upwards of $35 million. Well over half of what it would cost to build that facility. So it's a very real problem for our transit agency, not to mention the zero emission transit mandate in and of itself. So
yeah,
just thought I would add to that conversation.
No, I appreciate that. And I think I'm glad you said that, because you all as the operator, managers and executives in your organizations, you all know your business best. And I mean, as boards, we're not in the day to day. So communicating that real and immediate challenge to all of us is very helpful. So, and then on that note, I mean, I know we've been in conversations with staff and so I'm looking forward to our transit coordinating committee to be more engaged and having all of you as operator, the executive decision makers involved in that. I think your involvement in that committee will help elevate the conversations and be more productive in the future. So, yes, yeah, Director.
I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Is my day job before I retired was the Director of Transportation for Elk Grove Unified, San Juan part of that. And, so what I saw happen in the school bus world was exactly what happened. Nationally, there's about 57% of kids ride the school bus to school. In California, it's 15% and dropping. And what you have now is it's just special ed, basically. Regular ed kind of just went away. And as a mayor of Rockland, I can tell you that, and I know every one of the other cities have the same problem. Our schools are the worst issues we have for traffic twice a day at every single site. It's just a nightmare, and that's what we have. And the state did the same thing. They kept telling us, and so for using Elk Grove as an example, it's 320 square miles. It's a third of Sacramento County. There is a place for zero emission. I can't cover a route in Elk Grove because of the range issue. Mid-Placer up in the foothills, so Auburn, they can't get to Forest Hill and back with the zero emission. There's some places it just doesn't. Now we're in Rockland, heck yeah, we should be doing it all the heck because we can do that there. Until I take the baseball team to Elk Grove or go on a field trip to the Bay Area. You know, we did CNG, we did propane, which was fabulous, but they wouldn't cover propane because it's not zero, even though it's, you know, it's as close as you can get. But what happened is exactly what you're talking about. We just lost the service because that's general classroom dollars that had to use. And sooner but later, they just kept eliminating the service. And quite frankly, it's the biggest transit the industry you could have. If every parent, you can't use transit to go to work because you got to still take your kid to school first, and you just can't do it. I think it's important that we have a voice together because I've seen what happens to a transit service if we don't.
Sir.
Rich Frost with the City of Roseville. Hey, Jill, good to see
Good
you.
to see you.
It just kind of a comment, you know, on top of the funding concerns, I think that we all have, you know, another big, issue that is not, I don't think an easy solvable one by any means is the bus manufacturers or the OEMs. You know, our current turn is probably, 18 months, but now we're being told it's closer to 2 years, even if we place an order today, right? And so that's certainly a real challenge. I know that both Placer County and Roseville were going to place an order with Gillig here probably a couple months ago. And we're said, no, everything's at a bay right now because we need to figure out this tariff thing. So when we get on the other side of that, of course, we're still going to be placing our orders, but even with a replacement schedule, it's, there's some definite challenges out there outside of the funding itself is actually getting the buses made and delivered. And so just kind of want to throw that as a comment. Like I said, I don't think there's any real easy solution to it, but it is a reality that on the front end, we're really facing, and there's some challenges there too. So.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you for having us convene this. I think allowing that opportunity for the TCC to invest is important. And having listened to the board meeting, I think the other thing that's important to realize is the last time we went through the recession, the first thing we saw was people moving to transit, which is good from a ridership perspective. But when you put it to a place where now operating dollars at risk, and we talk about the economic vitality of the region, I think it goes really strongly to the initiatives in the blueprint on how do we have transit be successful? So at an opportunity where the economy drives people to transit, what happens when transit can't stand up and be seen as a viable mode? And what is that relationship? Because the reality is those who are most economically at risk in the region are those who become the most transit dependent the fastest. And so I think that is a compounded piece of this, is that we really look at those industries that are service oriented. They are the most transit dependent. They have the most non-traditional hours. And then when you look at these kind of reductions, they live the farthest out. They need those longest routes. They need that span of coverage. when we start to see these kind of restrictions come in on the funding side, it actually has this huge economic impact that is worth a bigger impact than the transit dollars they keep. And I think that's part of where the message comes in, is that for the savings or the diversion, the actual economic impact from transit, I think, is underestimated on just how many people fall from their job. Because it is, if you can't get there on a reliable way to get to transportation, if the buses can't meet their routes, if we don't have the funding to be having the kind of frequencies that can get people there, and you see hour 90-minute headways come in like you used to see in the recession, people don't go to work. And that's when the economy struggles its most. And transit's kind of the hidden behind the scenes factors of that, because the first thing you give up is your car, especially in California with housing prices the way it is. That's the first thing people look to ditch. But when transit can't do it, there really is a struggle.
Points. Yeah. Autumn, go ahead.
Sorry to double dip, but I wanted to raise like one bright spot. And just because there's a lot of challenges. And so one thing I just want to highlight, and this board has been a big part of, is the creation of CARTA, our new tolling authority. And with the YOLO 80 project, a real strong commitment to use excess toll revenue to fund transit. And so that's part of the mitigation strategy that was approved as part of the YOLO 80 EIR, is to increase frequencies of transit using some of those toll revenues. And in August, we're going to be presenting, we now have traffic and revenue analysis, estimates of toll revenue that we're going to be bringing forward to the CARTA board for conversation. And I mean, we're still, I would say, like at least 12, if not 18 months away from really thinking about what can we firmly commit to long-term in terms of transit investments. But I just think it's in the blueprint, right? In terms of looking at those opportunities for funding sources, funding streams that we can control here regionally. And so as we're looking at managed lanes on I-5 and other places elsewhere, Highway 65 in Placer County, et cetera, I think that's something to just really think about as an opportunity and to drill into, is how do we really leverage what's going on with our highway system to be a sustainable source of funding for transit.
Yeah. Thank you very much. All right. Any other comments?
Sure.
Again,
I just want to close it out by saying thanks to everybody for staying. I know we gave you a long day at SACOG. Thank you to the general manager and staff for attending. And a reminder to all of you, there's 16 of you on the SACOG board who also wear transit agency hats, right? And so we adopt a resolution each year saying you have a responsibility to think about transit, bring it into the board and the decisions here on the policy board. And to all of you general managers and staff, these are your reps, right? And so work with them, engage with them, right? We want this to be a board that is a champion of multimodal transportation solutions. I think you all know that, but we're just trying to figure out how can we actually make it something so whereby this really is an amazing collection, right, of both the staff and the elected officials. And when we have these challenges in front of us, we can tackle these together and collectively. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Yep. Echo that. And thank you, Michael, for taking the time as well. So with that, everyone, thank you. Have a great afternoon. Meeting adjourned. Thanks.